Rheostromia. In the shadowed heart of Rheostromia, silence had settled like dust. Once a thriving land, the city had been reshaped by war. Its streets now filled not with merchants and citizens, but with deserters, mercenaries, and a few desperate smugglers clinging to what little remained of the old order. Amid this quiet decay, Negary had grown more reclusive. His throne, carved from darkness itself, sat empty more often than not. But his voice, cold and distant, still echoed through the hall. I expected Eldridge to rise the moment Nala appeared, yet he remained still, passive, strange. He was nowhere to be seen, but his presence was everywhere. "Your lordship," rasped Granny Sealy, her twisted figure hunched beside the throne. "The prophecy remains unchanged. Eldridge will face Nala. Their confrontation is inevitable." "Then why is he back down?" Negary's voice was unreadable. Neither anger nor confusion, just cold calculation. "Because he has chosen surrender," Sealy said. "He rose on the will of the last god, and now that same divine will restrain him. His refusal to oppose Nala is his surrender. He has passed the burden meant for him to her." Negary fell silent for a long moment. Eldridge Andrea, the king I had anticipated, simply gave up. There was no satisfaction in his voice, only disappointment. "It is almost time, my lord," Sealy said. "The black abyss draws near. The end is close. No matter what path they choose, ours will be the hand that claims victory." "Then recall the 3 troops," Negary ordered. The 3 troops were his personal legions, each a reflection of his evolution. The Crow Men, his first army, born of transformation. The Ghost Men, silent assassins honed by war. And the Dragon Men, his most secretive, infused with power beyond human comprehension. Their recall signaled one thing. The final act was beginning. In Marlow, capital of the Intercam Kingdom, the war was nearing its political end. Within the audience chamber, Nala sat quietly beside King Seth I, her back straight, her eyes sharp, even though she wore a flowing, uncomfortable court dress. "This ridiculous thing is limiting my movement," she grumbled internally. "If I move too hard, it'll tear right off. What's even the point of clothes like these?" Seth I, now heavier and softer than before, wore a perpetual smile. It looked warm, but years of war had taught Nala not to trust masks. He stood, raising a jeweled goblet high. "Ladies and gentlemen, our counteroffensive has succeeded. Marshal Reese is returning with news of victory and a Roy's ambassador. Once the treaty is signed, all those who serve shall be rewarded accordingly." The nobles in attendance cheered politely. Yet under their smiles, most knew the truth. The war had to end. Not for glory, but for survival. Intercam had lost too many men. If the conflict dragged on, there'd be no one left to fight, no one left to rebuild. The nobles that survived had already begun carving out new power for themselves in the vacuum left by the fallen. A tentative peace would allow the nation to stabilize, for a few decades, at least. Among them sat Llewyn Donner, now clad in opulent white robes marked with the church's sigil. He was no longer Cardinal Donner. He was now Pope Donner, the youngest pope in the Church of Divine Grace's long history. His rise had been swift, partly due to his effort, partly due to legacy. His late mentor, Cardinal Augustine, had held considerable sway. When war eliminated his chief rival, Llewyn had moved quickly, leveraging aristocratic ties and wartime necessity to take the mantle. And now, his ambition only grew. The next step, he thought, is spreading the church's light across the continent. He glanced at Nala. It was because of her, and an agreement with Seth and the nobles, that the church had pulled her from the battlefield. Together, they had pressured Royas during treaty talks, using their advantage to force a key concession: missionary access to Roya's territory. And for Llewyn, that was the true victory. First cardinal, then pope. Now, the greatest pope in history. Not out of vanity, at least not solely. Llewyn believed in his mission. He had seen the records. He knew the true threat was not war, but the black abyss. According to church doctrine, this world was once a small corner of light carved from the abyss by the will of God. But God did not remain long. He continued to battle the darkness elsewhere. Each great era of civilization, each empire, rose or fell, depending on whether God's attention could be drawn back. The first empire fell to false idols. The second was sustained by faith. The fourth twisted belief into worship of lesser spirits, and it too collapsed. Only faith, true and widespread, could purify the abyss for good. And for that, the world needed to believe again. The more that believe, the more likely God will return. That was why Wynn needed peace. That was why he needed Royas. And that was why he needed Nala. A few days later, Marshal Reese returned with the army's noble commanders, and with him, the ambassadors of Royas. Peace negotiations began immediately. Over several tense days, demands were made and concessions given. Royas agreed to most terms, except one. They were unwavering on a single point. Nala had to personally travel to the border. She, and she alone, was to represent in Turkham and sign the treaty with Royas. No substitutes. No exceptions. A symbolic gesture? Perhaps. Or perhaps something more. The negotiations had stalled. Though the kingdom of Royas had compromised on several points, one demand remained immovable. The peace treaty must be signed by Nala herself. Everyone knew it was more than a symbolic gesture. Nala was no mere delegate. She was Intercam's saintress of salvation, a princess, and in all likelihood, its future queen. For Royas to insist she signed the treaty in person was not diplomacy. It was a trap. The nobles rejected the demand outright at first. Many had once deserted Nala when political tides shifted, but shame and guilt over that decision had fostered a newfound sense of pride, or at least the appearance of it. They called it the bottom line of nobility, a final shred of dignity they claimed to uphold. But as the days passed, that pride began to crumble. Rumors spread that the Royas army was reorganizing and preparing for war once more. Royas had made it clear. If Turkham wouldn't agree, then peace talks were over. And just like that, public opinion shifted. It's just a signature. There's no real danger. Isn't she the saintress? Isn't it her duty to bring peace? These whispers turned into voices, and the voices became pressure. The same nobles who once praised her valor began questioning her resolve. They branded her hesitation as selfish, an unwillingness to sacrifice for the greater good. After all, if she truly was the saintress, shouldn't she be the first to act? Worse, they twisted her silence into arrogance. She's just a lucky village girl, they muttered. Anyone in her place could have done the same. Her title is just a name. But their words were full of contradiction. They wanted her to go, to safeguard their peace and protect their interests. Yet, deep down, they hoped she would go, not just to prove her title hollow, but to validate their own betrayal. If Nala walked to her death willingly, it meant she wasn't above them after all. For King Seth I, however, there was no ambiguity. He wanted her dead. With Nala gone, there would be no challenge to his rule, no rival queen, no saintress to outshine his throne. Eventually, the last layer of noble resistance fell. They broke what little remained of their self-respect and agreed. Nala must go. Among the common people, there was no outrage. Despite the respect and admiration they held for Nala, few opposed the decision. Some even supported it. They believed salvation came at a cost, and that cost, they reasoned, was Nala. She is the saintress. Isn't it her job to suffer for the rest of us? Only the Church of Divine Grace remained divided. Upper clergy who had helped raise Nala now opposed sending her, fearing the loss of their greatest symbol and their ticket to power. But others saw opportunity. If Nala went to Royas willingly, it would open the door for the church to expand its influence there. If war resumes, they argued, Royas will shun us forever. But if we seal peace through her, they may welcome us in. In the end, Pope Lwin silenced the dissent. Wielding the scepter of divine grace, he addressed them with cold resolve. The black abyss is rising. We have no time. The light of God must reach beyond Turkham. This is our moment. He remembered the day he first persuaded Nala to step forward. And now, He might be sending her to die, but his conviction didn't waver. Everything I do for the world. During those tense days, Nala paid no attention to court debates or whispering nobles. She stayed home, beside her mother. Isabella looked far older than her age. The hardships of a life spent scraping by had taken their toll. When Nala was born, she hadn't had the luxury to rest. Work began again the very next day. Now, she held her daughter's hand, pleading, "Nala, don't go. Don't follow your father's path." She remembered all too well how Jacob, her husband, had been pushed to sacrifice himself for the greater good. The crowd had cheered him on, only to forget him after his death. Now history was repeating itself. Nala squeezed her mother's hand gently. "But it's the right thing to do," she said softly. "If I do nothing and war begins again, I'll regret it forever." She smiled, not with confidence, but with kindness. "You were the one who taught me, remember? When faced with a hard choice, do what you believe is right." Isabella's eyes filled with sorrow. Back then, she had supported her husband's choice. Now, she wanted to stop her daughter, but found she couldn't. She had helped shape Nala into the saintress of salvation, and now she couldn't pull her back. As Nala left the manor, the crowd erupted in cheers. But to Isabella, those cheers sounded hollow, unworthy. They had forgotten that it was Nala's actions that earned her the title, not the title that demanded her sacrifice. They don't deserve her. With Nala's agreement, the treaty advanced rapidly. Only one step remained, a ceremonial signing at the border between Royas and Intercam. A delegation was assembled, church missionaries, noble escorts, and the saintress herself. On the day of departure, a group of armored knights rode in. They dismounted and knelt before her. Leading them was Alkers Lewis, heir to the famed School of Steel. "Your Excellency Nala, please allow us to accompany you," he said. Nala smiled. "Alkers, weren't you just granted a peerage? Didn't you say you were discussing marriage with the daughter of an earl? There's no need for you to come." Alkers stood. He drew his knight's sword and raised it in both hands, its polished surface catching the morning light. "Those things mean nothing now," he said firmly. Behind him, the knights did the same, blades raised before their faces in solemn unity. "We are knights," they declared in unison, "and we are not afraid to die."
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
"I told you," Princess Nala would definitely agree. "She is the saintress of salvation after all." Such remarks, ever since Nala made her choice, Rhys had heard these same words countless times. Looking at the smiles on those people's faces, Rhys felt disgusted like never before. After taking over command from Nala and finishing the Reclamation War, the name of Marshal Rhys had become renowned. In fact, under the propaganda of some people with ulterior motives, his role in the war had been excessively exaggerated, allowing him to even obtain a greater peerage than before. At a glance, he was simply the winner in life. These people are not worth saving. Recalling what they had been doing these past days, Rhys suddenly felt that despite gaining prestige, status, and power, he had never been redeemed. He was still walking in darkness. If he chose to plunge further into the darkness, then in the next few decades, regardless if Seth I managed to keep his throne or not, regardless if the Church of Divine Grace could spread into Royas or not, Rhys would be able to obtain what others could only dream of for their entire lives. He would become one of the pillars of power within Intercam. Wealth, title, reputation, women, all of these would be within his arm's reach. Unfortunately, Nala is still too straightforward. Rhys took out the Book of Monsters and turned over its pages. "Without my help, she is only a little girl after all. I walk in the darkness, but what I pursue is that pure light." He turned to the last page of the Book of Monsters. Depicted here was a terrifyingly powerful monster. It had no form. It was the plague that most people would dread. Once unleashed, it could cause the death of an entire city, or perhaps an entire nation, if left unchecked. Rhys cut his hand and dripped his blood onto the page to activate the book, then placed it inside a secret room, placed enough meat inside to act as a hotbed for the monster, and sealed it shut. As an aristocrat, Most people could not intrude his manor without his permission. In other words, as long as he lived, this secret room would never be opened. However, if he were to not return from this trip, then those greedy and foolish people would surely not stay their hands from his treasures. Reese got onto a carriage and looked around at the crowd of people outside, celebrating the arrival of peace. He smirked, thinking to himself, "Pray, all of you, pray that nothing happens to Nala. Otherwise, you people aren't worthy of her salvation." When Eldridge and Nala meet, the dragon scale sword will finally play its part. Negary quietly waited. Since a long time ago, after Granny Sealy took refuge with him, he had been planning this matter. In this world, he had reached his limit. Because of the limitations of this world and the limitations of himself, he couldn't advance any further. And so, what he needed to do was find a way out of this world. Negary had ordered someone to use the true spirit soul transmigration method he obtained from the otherworldly soul all those years ago. But after the person's soul retracted into his true spirit, he died. And similar to a normal person's death, the true spirit simply reincarnated without transmigrating to another world. Through this experiment, Negary realized that the method he obtained wasn't necessarily incorrect, simply that he was missing something. For example, the coordinates of other worlds. Without a coordinate and a way to lock on to that coordinate, the so-called true spirit transmigration was nothing but a direct shortcut to reincarnation. Therefore, if he wanted to leave this dilapidated world, he had to think of other ways. For example, in ancient times, how did the new deity and progenitor dragon leave this world? They originally left with their entire race, leaving only a few members who weren't willing to leave. And so, before anything else, the new deity and progenitor dragon must have obtained the coordinates of another world. That was why they were able to leave. The foresight of Granny Sealy had also confirmed this. Naturally, before confirming whether or not he could borrow those previous channels to leave this world, it was essential that the Black Abyss must be prevented from coming back. Otherwise, being shrouded by the Black Abyss, this entire world would change. Even Negary himself wasn't sure what he would become after being covered by the Black Abyss. This was unacceptable to Negary, so someone must inherit that ancient mission and reling the flames, preventing the arrival of the Black Abyss. However, not just anyone could qualify for this task. In the first place, why did both the new deity and progenitor dragon choose to leave? They were originally creatures born from the Black Abyss, whose nature was changed by the flames. There was simply no better fuel to prolong the flame than the three original gods who came from the first flame. However, besides the giant who chose to first take up that responsibility, the new deity and progenitor dragon both decided not to return to the Black Abyss, nor to prolong the flames, but to escape. Strictly speaking, if the new deity and progenitor dragon had chosen to take up their responsibility, there wouldn't be so much trouble like there currently was. But unfortunately, they both chose to escape. The last god took the new deity's place as fuel for the flame, but in the end, he was only a substitute, incomparable to the authentic one. That was why today, this world's level of supernatural power had fallen to its current pathetic state, and why the flames were about to die out again. And Eldridge, who had acquired the power of the last god, was bound by the same mission to become a new substitute. That was the case until Nala showed up. Since her dragon's blood had awakened, she barely had the qualifications to replace the progenitor dragon. Because she was still too weak for the job, Negary gave her the dragon scale sword. That sword was an extremely precious treasure for anyone with the dragon bloodline. A person with dragon's blood who came into contact with this sword for a long period of time was more likely to awaken their bloodline. For Nala, the role of this sword was to make it so that Nala would gradually grow closer to becoming a true dragon. Before signing the peace treaty, I asked that Her Excellency the Princess to come with me to meet someone the emissary of Royas, who was also an acquaintance of Nala, was the aging Smick Landsher, who firmly declared that as he held the peace treaty in his hands, if the princess isn't willing to, then the kingdom of Royas can only wage war once again. So it's finally here? Behind Nala, The knights who followed Nala here all had serious expressions on their faces. The Roya's kingdom was willing to give up so many benefits, even risk starting another war, just to get Nala to arrive at the border, surely for a scheme of some kind. If Royas were to try and use this matter to force Nala to bend to their every will, these knights would be the first to retaliate. Please don't misunderstand. We don't have any intention of hurting Her Excellency the Princess. Smick had a bitter look on his face. At this point, it is already impossible for us to hurt Her Excellency in any way. His Majesty, King Eldridge wants to see you. Smick said His Majesty is not too far from here, and you can bring your knights with you. Our ambitions were certainly part of the reason why the royal kingdom first started the war, but now it is nothing more than a last resort. His Majesty will inform you of the hidden details. Smick placed his hand on his heart and declared, in the name of the School of Light, and as the head of the Lansher family, I swear that Her Excellency the Princess will not be harmed during this trip. Nala stared closely at Smick in front of her, then finally nodded. The future is clear, Lord Negary, Granny Seely said with a smile. Eldridge's methods destroyed the possibility of Nala's peaceful life. Granny Seely said with a smile. Nala will accept Eldridge's terms and become fuel to prolong the flame, and Eldridge will lose the qualifications to be king. When Nala opens the kiln of the first flame, the passage that leaves this world will be unlocked, and we will leave this world of despair under Lord Negary's lead. Granny Seely said firmly. Is the dragon body finished? Negary ignored Granny Seely's flattery and asked while pointing his finger to his forehead. The modulation has been completed. Milord's current body has reached the limit of what can be achieved in this world. With Drakatung, Milord can even exert power beyond the limits of this world, Granny Seely replied seriously. Then I will leave, helping Nala open the kiln of the first flame to you. The 3 troops are at your disposal. Before I go, I still have some unfinished business to take care of. Negary carefully examined this body that took great efforts to finally create, then gave Granny Seely that order. Milord wants to go meet Eldridge face to face. Granny Seely, he curiously asked. Although he had backed down and gave the qualifications to Nala, he is still one of the peak entities I've met in this world. I have to at least attend his funeral. Negary put on his clothes as well as a robe and left his palace. Suddenly, Negary turned around, looked at the silent Granny Seely, and solemnly asked, Granny Seely, what do you think is the nature of life? Lord Negary, in a general sense, what determines who a person is isn't their body, nor their soul, but rather their unique origin. Granny Seely was stunned, and then answered affirmatively. And the nature of an origin is the embodiment of the world and the universe, as well as the connection between an individual with their world and the universe. Therefore, the evil spirits, entities that exist separately of an origin, are considered to be the error of this world. Granny Seely answered him truthfully. Are you not afraid to offend me? Negary asked. Sometimes, errors might seem to be more correct, do they not? For example, Nala, who has been making the right choice, would also face the most tragic future of all. Granny Seely said with certainty. Because this world itself might be an error. Perhaps it is true. Negary nodded and left Riestromia. Granny Seely looked on as Negary left, then gave the orders to the 3 troops who were on standby. Some of them were responsible for ambushing the members of Hales, while others were to create obstacles meant to help Nala improve herself, forcing her to keep using dragon's blood. That way, she would grow closer and closer to a true dragon, thus ensuring her suitability to be the substitute for the progenitor dragon. Meanwhile, on top of the gloomy staircase, Nala was staring at the statue of the last god, as well as Eldridge who stood behind it. The knights behind her were all cautiously watching their surroundings. Although Smick had sworn upon his own honor that Nala would not be harmed, the thing called honor could be worth as much as all the riches in this world, but it could also be worthless. Putting all you have on the honor of another is nothing but a stupid act. Do you know what you have done? Eldridge carefully observed Nala, then finally spoke up after a long silence. Everything you've done is driving yourself to ruin. I'm just doing the right thing. That's all. Nala didn't care for Eldridge's words. No matter what, as long as she kept walking on the right path, regardless of her own ending, she would not regret it. The right thing, Eldridge muttered, then continued. Then did you know, during your initial battle after Calamity, I had a secret force stationed nearby the outskirts of Calamity. At that time, if I had given an order, that force would have attacked from behind and formed a pincer attack with the Legion at the front to completely destroy your army. Yes. I did indeed feel a sense of crisis at the time, but fortunately it disappeared afterwards. Nala nodded and admitted. Back then, the Intercam domestic nobles were in a hurry to retaliate, so they didn't fortify the rear position too well. If an ambush had indeed come from the rear, there was a certain danger of them being wiped out. That was because I retreated, Eldridge admitted. If I didn't retreat, I would have been able to lead Royas to conquer the entire country of Intercam, then eventually the entire continent to become the Fifth Empire. And the reason I retreated was because you appeared. You gave me a way out. Eldridge pointed to the statue of the last god behind him and said, "This is the last god. When First Empire fell, it was he who prevented the advent of the Black Abyss. His power made it so that the more territory he ruled over, the stronger he became," Eldridge said. The Andrea family had been connected through generation after generation of ancestral spirits, finally ending with me obtaining the power of the last god. But the stronger you are, the more responsibility you have to bear, such as preventing the next advent of the Black Abyss. Eldridge snapped his fingers to reveal a series of murals around them. These murals depicted what would happen if the last god hadn't prevented the advent of the Black Abyss. The sun lost its luster. Darkness began to envelop the earth. Vegetation withered and died, and the animals began to mutate into strange, eerie monsters. People gradually lost their minds and became irrational lunatics. In the end, everything in the world turned into ashes and returned to their essence, to the Black Abyss. This is the Black Abyss. Eldridge pointed to all of them and said, the last god held the hope of the entire continent in his hand at the time. He ignited himself, turned his everything into the flames, and stopped the Black Abyss, finally ending up as the statue behind me. Originally, I also needed to walk this path. I had to lead Royas, conquer the entire continent, then ignite myself, because only then would I be qualified to become the torch. You said that I became your way out. That means I'm also qualified to be a torch, Nala said calmly, as she observed the tragic murals around her. Indeed, only the 3 original gods who came from the first flame have the qualifications to become the torch. The giant has already been burned, so what remained were the new deity and the progenitor dragon. The last god was the replacement for the new deity. I am the successor of the last god. And since your dragon's blood has awakened to a significant degree, you can now become the replacement for the progenitor dragon. Eldridge displayed an extremely mockingly grin. So, make the right choice now, Miss Saintress of Salvation. Choose to become a substitute for the progenitor dragon and burn yourself as the torch, or choose to sit and watch as the Black Abyss descends and destroys everything. However, ever since Nala became the Saintress of Salvation, she had no other choice. Eldridge's retreat had granted what Nala wished for, and also pushed Nala onto the path of self-destruction. I will walk on the right path. Nala's words were still as resolute as she was at the start, unwavering, unchanged. Then I will leave everything to you. Eldridge's smile slowly faded. He suddenly realized that Nala didn't choose to dedicate her everything for the sake of the Saintress of Salvation name. Nala did everything she did because they were correct. That was enough. She needed no cheering, no honor, and no persecution from anyone. She had never been lost, as she had always trodden the right path. The right path didn't mean the righteousness of others, but rather her own righteousness. And that was why she became the purest Saintress of Salvation. As a person, she was admirable, so much so that Eldridge felt inferior. If he had been firm on his own path, he would have already conquered Intercam and continued on his way to unifying the entire continent. I will give you all the information I have about the Black Abyss. You can verify the truth of the matter yourself. Eldridge signed the peace treaty and returned it to Nala, then told her one final thing. To protect the kiln of the first flame, that group of ghouls has moved its entrance to another place. You will need to gain their recognition before they open the entrance. I have given you the specific location. Eldridge's tone was full of heavy fatigue. I wish you a pleasant journey, great saintress. Your Excellency, you wouldn't really agree to become that so-called torch, would you? After they exited the ruins of the last god, Ulkers impatiently spoke up. Maybe this is all a part of Eldridge's scheme. I can sense that what he said was the truth, and I have also felt the black abyss. Nala squinted her eyes. As her dragon's bloodline awakened more and more, she had vaguely been able to sense the black abyss approaching. But why must your Excellency bear this responsibility? Even if the black abyss is coming, sacrificing the princess can't be the only way. Ulkers shouted in pain and anger. If possible, they would rather there be an enemy that they could face, that they could fight against, instead of Nala having to bear this sort of responsibility. But it was precisely because of Nala being like this that they were willing to give up their peerage, give up their family, and their everything in order to follow her. Then, my knights, with a smile on her face, Nala asked softly as she did in Calamir's barracks years ago, "Would you like to go with me?" "As you wish," several knights responded with tragic smiles on their faces without the slightest hesitation. "You may go back first, Smick." Eldridge once again stared at the back of the last god statue and fell into thought. "This servant is afraid I won't be able to do that." Smick's voice was extremely bitter and even contained a bit of madness in his words. Eldridge turned around to see that Smick's body had begun to grow black feathers, his strangely glowing cutlass already drawn. His aging face reverted to its younger state as a completely different aura than Smick began to gush out from his body. "Negary." Eldridge's eyes became cold. "To occupy my courtier's body, are you ready to offer me your loyalty?" "I came to offer you death, O greatest king." "Eldridge, your path has reached its end." Negary flapped the crow wings behind his back and rushed directly towards Eldridge. "Despicable evil spirit." Eldridge stood still without moving. From the darkness, several people in armor leapt out. Their swords swung down at Negary without hesitation. When he swung the cutlass, it didn't cut through the opponent's swords as he had expected. Negary had to retreat in order to avoid the other armored men's attacks. Ancestral spirit armor, as Negary sensed the remnant soul aura on the armors, he instantly understood what these things were. Before Eldridge produced the last god serum, the ancestral spirit armor was the representative supernatural power of the Roya's kingdom. Strong combatants of the Roya's kingdom would choose to sacrifice themselves and turn their remnant soul into an ancestral spirit. Embedes. Truthfully, ancestral spirits were similar in a way to Negary's Ghostman's secondary souls, but there was also a difference. The Ghostman's secondary souls undergo a pseudo-release to obtain a supernatural power when separated from their true spirit, while ancestral spirits gave up pseudo-release, gave up their field of perception, gave up their own sense of self to obtain powerful interference force instead. The Roya's kingdom would then attach these ancestral spirits to their armor. Look for people who are suitable to each ancestral spirit, and have them put them on the armor to obtain the power of the interference force. After a certain amount of training, they would truly become a one-man army who could match 100. Their swords are reinforced with interference force, so they weren't destroyed. Negary thought to himself. The knights didn't stand still and continued to rush towards Negary with their swords in hand. Negary didn't try to avoid them, and instead threw the cutlass in his hand at Eldridge, who was still standing under the stone statue. One of the knights swung their sword to block the cutlass, while the other knights' swords directly plunged into Negary's body. "Oh no!" Eldridge silently grimaced as he saw Negary's body directly explode. His red blood splashed all over the ancestral spirit armors around him. The knights all screamed in pain after being contaminated by the blood. To use an ancestral spirit armor, one's spirit and mind must be suitable with the ancestral spirit inside. So once the ancestral spirit armor becomes contaminated, so will the suitable knights wearing it, since Negary's blood was mixed with a large amount of Negary's willpower. It crippled this team of ancestral spirit knights just like that. Eldridge didn't even have time to sigh. A huge amount of force erupted right in front of him as his vision became blurred. A hand appeared abruptly immediately in front of Eldridge's face. A hand filled with scales and razor-sharp metal claws. If Eldridge had reacted any slower, the hand would have inserted itself directly into his eye sockets, went straight into his skull, and messed up everything inside his brain. A huge interference force gushed out like a tidal wave and forced the owner of the hand to retreat and reveal themselves. Negary. Eldridge mumbled the name of his opponent, descending into Smick's body to attract his attention while staying hidden within the darkness, waiting for an opportunity to deliver a fatal blow. If he called himself the second-best assassin on this continent, there would probably be no first. Juliest. The strange syllable combined with the dragon's pressure that filled the air to release a destructive force that blew Eldridge's interference force apart. Negary immediately threw a punch towards Eldridge's head without any intention to talk. As the red and white cranial substances splattered onto the stone statue behind him, Negary's dragon pupils shifted without letting down his guard. Eldridge's headless corpse slowly faded away to reveal its illusory nature. You really can't be underestimated. The pressure that Negary gave off slowly grew heavier and heavier. Eldridge had taken advantage of the moment when he was repelled by the interference force to create an illusion and avoid Negary's killing blow. Interference force, that's what I call this power. You humans probably call it mental power or something to that effect. Negary's draconic features gradually shrank as he returned to a humanoid appearance. Strictly speaking, this should be a power that only remnant souls can possess. Negary continued as his gaze randomly swept across his surroundings. After all, the origin controls the soul, and the soul remains stable while the origin exists, making it almost impossible to produce interference force. And yet your interference force surpasses even mine. An evil spirit. Negary spoke with certainty. This must surely be the ability you obtained from the last god. Let me guess. Earlier you had said that the larger the territories that the last god controlled, the stronger he would become, combined with how much you reject the Church of Divine Grace. A conclusion could be drawn. Negary analyzed. Your source of power is probably something similar to faith. The more citizens that are dependent on you, the more powerful your mental power would become. Am I right, Eldridge? Negary abruptly turned around and swung his hand with his palm in the shape of a knife. Something in the air resisted him, then quickly fell back to silence. In other words, this is the moment when you are at your weakest. If Negary had assumed correctly, then this was indeed the time when Eldridge was weakest. After all, with Roya's invasion of Intercam failing, the Roya's people's support of Eldridge wasn't as pronounced as it was before, and that's why you are hiding. Negary's words were full of contempt, as if Eldridge's current behavior was unfit for his status as a king. At this moment, Negary had conveniently ignored the fact that he had also concealed himself and ambushed Eldridge earlier. It was as if being shameless and blind to their own faults were essential qualities for those in a superior position. Negary's words contained a certain level of psychological suggestion. Although he didn't know whether it would work on Eldridge or not, as long as it could affect his emotions even just a little bit, that would bring Negary closer to victory. For opponents who were essentially just food, Negary could employ strategies that roused their spirit and forced them to exert more of their potential, which would make their souls more delicious to consume. But Eldridge, whether Negary wanted to admit it or not, was an entity on the same level as he was. So Negary wouldn't play such a dangerous game and would use every means he could to kill him as soon as possible. This way, the situation gradually became deadlocked. Eldridge hid in the shadows and occasionally used interference force to attack and ambush Negary, but didn't make any big moves out of fear that Negary would find him. As Negary had said, his power came from faith. The faith of each person that supported him would directly reinforce him and make his mental power stronger, eventually growing to a terrifying degree. But now that the invasion of Intercam had failed after 10 years of fighting, his power had reached rock bottom. Comparing individual strength alone, he was definitely no match for Negary right now. It might be easy to say that you are inferior to someone, but how many people could actually admit such a thing? Especially for people like Eldridge, who had once stood at the peak of the continent, achieving success that far surpassed any other king of Royas and attaining great glory. However, it was he who defined this glory and not the other way around. For these kinds of people, they themselves are powerful. Even if Eldridge didn't have his excellent background, he would still have achieved success, but there would have been differences in the magnitude of success. How cautious! Negary walked towards the group of ancestral spirit knights who had passed out because of his willpower, grabbed one of their helmets, and crushed the helmet with a press of his bare hands. Although this armor had fused with an ancestral spirit, without a wielder, the armor itself was still laughably weak against Negary's dragon body. He slowly rolled the fragments of the helmet into a tiny steel ball in between his hands, then threw it out like a shotgun shell, scattering the fragments all over the area. The stone walls all around were swiftly punched full of bowl-sized holes from the attack. Perceiving the changes in the trajectory of the steel ball, Negary grabbed one of the knights and plunged his finger into the knight's body. Dragon's pressure swiftly harmonized his surrounding rhythm as he uttered a foreign syllable, Keelit. Some sort of power was infused into the knight's body, who was then thrown by Negary to the side. The knight's body started to inflate like a red balloon and burst, scattering his blood and flesh all around. An invisible force appeared to repel the blood away, and Eldridge was finally forced to show himself. It wasn't because of cleanliness that he did that, but because the power of Dracatung was infused within the blood, so allowing it to contaminate him would only lead to an even worse result. Reno. Negary didn't know a lot of Dracatung, only 4 kinds in total. Jliest, which meant unstoppable, capable of destroying everything that obstructed the user, which represented the peerless power of a dragon. Keelit, which meant surging force, capable of injecting one's own power into various items, then manipulate the item through that power. Negary injected his power into the knight's body and turned him into a live bomb. Since every bit of his flesh and blood contained Negary's power, if Eldridge had been contaminated, he would be marked by the power and be at an absolute disadvantage when facing Negary. In addition to these 2 syllables of Dracatung, there was also the Deliwo syllable that represented defense and Sul, which represented flight, or rather, levitation. A total of 4 syllables. Although these 4 syllables seemed simple, each one of them contained great power. Even the seemingly most useless syllable for flight would become exceedingly powerful when used well. It seems like you've made up your mind to kill me. Eldridge's face appeared somewhat gloomy. He didn't ask Negary why he must kill him. If the other party's intentions had been revealed, there was naturally no need to hesitate or prolong anything. Unleash. Seal of the Empire. A huge interference force began to spread to their surroundings, altering everything little by little. Normally, mental power or interference force manifested as a power that acted upon its surroundings like telekinesis, but Eldridge was displaying another use of interference force. My people believe in me. They believe that I can lead them to build a great empire, an empire belonging to the Royas people. The scene around Eldridge began to change. What was originally a staircase had turned into a large plaza, with people who donned uniforms gathered inside it. This is the expectation of each Royas citizen, and the miraculous power formed by their expectation is also my ideal country. Eldridge stood among the crowd of people, but stood higher than the rest. Negary felt the control of his dragon's pressure over the surroundings dropping to nil. If he used respiratory art, he would find that the surrounding rhythm had completely harmonized with Eldridge. This was Eldridge's power. One man turns into an army. One man stands as a country. As he stood within Eldridge's ideal country, Negary felt like he was fighting an entire country with his own strength, as if the air itself was desperately blocking his actions. Despite not receiving any obvious attacks, Negary's fighting strength had been weakened by 30%. The restriction of Dragon's pressure had also restricted Negary's Dracatung. Each of these Roya soldiers was wearing the same uniform, held up their weapons, and charged at Negary. These people were the manifestations of the Roya's people's expectations and hope, so they didn't know fear and would never retreat. Furthermore, since it was Eldridge who manifested them, each of them had Eldridge's experience in battle, were perfectly united, perfectly coordinated, and could exert terrifying strength in battle. The soldiers endlessly flocked to Negary like a tide. Each of Negary's punches and kicks could easily tear them apart, but there were too many soldiers. What was even worse was that these soldiers left no bodies behind after death. If they left corpses, they would at least serve to obstruct the next waves of attacks, but they simply turned into shadows after death, leaving the people behind them unhindered. As if that wasn't bad enough, Negary could tell that these soldiers weren't actually being killed, as they could simply be swiftly regenerated. And with his observation, the enemies on the plaza were no longer limited to these close-range soldiers. Archers, cavalry, and even siege weapons like catapults were slowly manifesting as well. Within Eldridge's seal of the Empire, any commonly used weapons and forces within Roya's could be manifested without much trouble. In fact, as long as Eldridge had the strength to maintain them, he could even summon ancestral spirit armors and last god serum soldiers within this illusory, ideal country of his. If this is everything you have, Eldridge, I can declare your death. Right at this moment, Negary slowly walked towards Eldridge, killing any attacker with a flick of his hands. More and more dragon characteristics began to manifest on Negary's body, from scales to horns, dragon wings, then finally a tail. His body was also growing larger, his humanoid appearance receding away. Even the breath coming from his nose and mouth were starting to be dyed yellow with the smell of sulfur. Until finally, a golden dragon took flight. As its abdomen slightly sunk in, an intense flame erupted from its mouth, burning the soldiers in its path, and directly struck Eldridge's body, crushing him into a pulp. It took Negary 10 years to create this dragon body. If it was only for the purpose of utilizing Dracotone, he wouldn't have had to go through so much trouble. Negary's true goal was to reproduce the power of true dragons from ancient times, which he had achieved. There was now essentially no difference between the current him and the dragons of old. This was also the most recent dragon to have existed ever since the final dragon Versace died at the end of the Third Empire. Negary, if you were willing to link the flames, perhaps there would have been no problem for both Nala and me. Eldridge's voice came from the other side. The body that Negary crushed was just another illusion. The response to Eldridge's comment was a huge dragon roar. Negary's dragon body was still growing larger. His dragon's pressure swiftly expanded into his surroundings and silently caused Eldridge's ideal country to collapse. In the end, the Roya's people's support of Eldridge had plummeted considerably. If it was still at its peak, Negary could only choose to defend himself against the seal of the Empire instead of crushing it by force like this. If you can hear their support, you can surely also hear their complaints and dissatisfaction. Negary dragon body gradually shrunk back into a humanoid shape. His vertical golden pupils stared at the drained-looking Eldridge. Since the seal of the Empire created through his mental power had been broken by force, Eldridge naturally received the appropriate backlash. The words of complaints and dissatisfaction of the Roya's people grew louder and louder in his mind. They complained about his inactivity during the later part of the war that allowed Nala to retaliate, complained about how he suppressed the Roya's domestic nobles so much, about how his belligerent actions cost so much wealth and benefits of the country. Do you regret it? Negary carefully approached Eldridge. Although his opponent seemed like he no longer had the strength to resist, there might still be some sort of trump card he was still hiding. Regret what? Regret that I had retreated. Eldridge didn't try to run. Since he had already lost, he might as well retain what little dignity he had left as a king. His complexion was terrible, but he was displaying an exceptional grin. Answering Negary's question, he spoke indifferently. I am a king, and that was simply the king's responsibility. I believe that my offspring will fulfill the dream that I failed to accomplish. Eldridge stood up and fixed up his appearance for one last time. Like a great king who watched over his subjects, he softly declared, The royal empire will surely be born. Then I shall send you on your way. Negary's dragon's pressure overflowed and filled the surrounding space. The sharp nails of his right hand pierced directly through Eldridge's neck, chopped off his head. As Eldridge's head fell to the ground, Negary turned to look at the statue of the last god behind him. It had always turned its back to the people below with arms wide open towards the sky. It appeared to be dignified and noble, like the guardian god of all living beings. In a sense, since he did choose to sacrifice himself to prevent the advent of the Black Abyss in the first place. But if you came to his front, you would find that the last god had many faces. All of them were vivid and lifelike, including the faces of dragons, of heroic humans, mysterious witches, and noble gods. Their races were all different, but they had one thing in common: the expressions on their faces that were full of pain, unwillingness, and despair. Our Epsilon. If sacrificing the last god alone was sufficient to stop the Black Abyss, then why did the new deity and progenitor dragon try to run away, betraying their missions and becoming traitors in the first place? Replacing the new deity and the progenitor dragon might seem simple, but it wasn't possible without paying a heavy price. The Black Abyss at the time was considerably more powerful than it is now. And so, in order to fulfill his role, the last god had gone on a hunt and assimilated powerful supernatural creatures into himself before burning them altogether. It could be said that the last god alone took out the majority of the supernatural entities in the world at the time and forced them all to burn away with him. If it weren't for him, the supernatural power in this world wouldn't have fallen to the state it was today, a mere shadow of its former self. If Eldridge had walked the same path as the last god and truly became his successor, then his loyal subjects would also burn as the torch together with him. That was the true reason why he chose to back down when he knew about Nala's existence. Even if his prestige and his honor as the greatest king were to be completely lost, even if the very subjects he protected complained and regarded him as the center of the Roya's kingdom, he would still not regret his actions. In his words, that was his responsibility as a king. The greatest king. That title is certainly not misplaced. Negary turned around and left, leaving Eldridge's headless body where it was. Even without his head, he was still standing at the top of the stairs, as if to watch over his subjects. The Sacred Valley is a group of assassins. Alkurs muttered the information he collected. For the sake of a certain belief, they assassinate people all over the world, not hesitating to even throw their lives away for it. Anyone unfortunate enough to become their target would be killed regardless of means or price. Alkur scowled as he continued. These people are simply lunatics. Their targets included nobles, merchants, adventurers, and even kings. What's their purpose? Nala asked, riding on the horse. Because they have the Black Abyss trait. Alkur sighed. No matter who that person is, even if they were a doctor who had saved countless lives, even if they were a wise monarch, as long as they possess the Black Abyss trait, Sacred Valley will kill them. And the stronger those with the Black Abyss trait are, the higher priority they would become as a target, Alkur said with a bit of disgust. And the way Scared Valley determines if somebody has the Black Abyss trait or not is entirely reliant on a set of unfathomable measurements. Many people have become their targets without even knowing about it. In short, it's a group of extremists who will stop at nothing for their belief. What a horrible organization. Nala received the documents. Some of them were given by Eldridge, some were obtained through the Church of Divine Grace, and some were collected by nobles. When he learned that Nala was going to the Sacred Valley to prevent the advent of the Black Abyss, Seth the First smiled so wide his mouth almost got stuck that way, and provided Nala with all the information about Sacred Valley and the Black Abyss within Intercam's royal records. According to Sacred Valley's own statement, they were the attendants of a great being, with a spring of life in their hands, and everything they did was for the sake of peace of this world. They valued life more than anyone else, and would never hurt the innocent. Each of them holds themselves to an extreme standard with clear beliefs. They cherished life and considered all lives to be precious and friendly. For them, even if you demanded protection fees, committed fraud, robbery, rape, murder, etc., no matter how much of a scumbag you are, as long as you did not have the Black Abyss trait, they were your friend. If someone in trouble asked them for help, they would be more than willing to do so. If you wanted to learn how to fight and assassinate from them, they would also generously teach you without any strings attached. Even if you were heavily injured and needed water from the Sacred Valley Spring of Life, after verification, they would also hand it to you without question. As long as you ignored how they vehemently slaughtered people with the mysterious Black Abyss trait, they could be regarded as the most amiable organization on the whole continent, even more so than the Church of Divine Grace. After all, the Church of Divine Grace could sometimes act very cruel during their religious wars. Sacred Valley was such a peculiar organization. Hales will definitely try to stop our trip to the Sacred Valley. Some other people will also attempt to carry out ambushes on us, so make sure to keep up your guards. Everyone, Nala looked to the group behind her, which included several knights who volunteered to follow her, as well as some knights and priests sent by the Church of Divine Grace to aid her. Other than that, there weren't anyone else. Hales had been borrowing chaos of war to grow continuously for the past few years, including the creation of numerous evil spirits in many places and spreading them all over the continent. Furthermore, as the war raged on, many people had been ruined. These people who had nothing left were easily drawn to Hale's ideals, joined them, and caused even more havoc, which led to more evil spirits. So now, Hales was growing stronger very rapidly. If it weren't for Negary who stole Ellis away, the unfathomable side of their god, the chopped hand that was about to take shape, Hales would have been even stronger right now. Despite this, 2 out of Hale's 4 sides of God had already returned to their seats. The cut tongue who represented God's unspeakable side, and the dazzled who represented God's unseeable side. Hales had chosen to leave Negary alone and nurtured another evil spirit to create the dazzled. It was said that the 3rd side of God, the chopped hand, had also been found and would soon return to their seat, leaving only the decapitated who represented the unreasonable side remaining. Nala didn't stop for a single moment while riding her horse. Within her perception, the thing called the Black Abyss was quickly awakening. If they did not hurry, many people would lose their lives from the precursor of the advent of the Black Abyss. An arrow accurately landed in front of Nala's horse and caused Nala to pull the reins, only to see an archer who didn't try to conceal himself, but rather stood openly in front of her. "Your Royal Highness, please return. Don't go to the Sacred Valley, or I will do everything to stop you," the person declared with a hoarse voice. Nala observed the man, a strong body wrapped in layers of bandages, with a white mask on his face and short silver hair, a spirited man. For some reason, Nala felt that she had seen this person somewhere before. Despite him shooting her, it was more of a warning or perhaps even protection. Nala could feel that the other party had no intention of hurting her. "Sorry, I decline your kindness as I have to go there," Nala said sincerely. "Please get out of the way. Sacred Valley won't recognize you. They won't even open the door to the kiln for you." Jason's voice was particularly hoarse. "You would only be going to your death. This is meaningless. Return to Ingmarlo, inherit your throne, and become a qualified monarch. You don't need to worry about the Black Abyss. They aren't your responsibilities to bear. But right now, I'm the only one who can bear them." Nala wasn't at all shaken by the other party's sincere words. "Then I am sorry." Jason pulled the string of his bow once again and said apologetically, "I can only severely wound you to prevent you from going any further, Alpha. To enter the kiln of the first flame, I need to go through the trial of Sacred Valley. But you said that Sacred Valley would not recognize me. Then I understand." Nala's eyes were still crystal clear. "I also have the Black Abyss trait, don't I?" "Yes. It is for this reason that Sacred Valley would never allow you to enter the kiln of the first flame, because it's very possible that you are not going to prolong the flame, but to extinguish it. Perhaps you might already be on the waiting list," Jason admitted without much trouble. "Back then, Cardinal Augustine saved my life once. That is why I'm violating the rules of Sacred Valley in order to tell you about this. Now, return." Jason persuaded her one last time. "You are Uncle Jason, aren't you?" Through Jason's words, Nala quickly realized who this person was. He was hired by Augustine during their crusade on Negary. and when he was ambushed by a crowman, it was Augustine who saved his life. In any case, not only did he have a connection with Nala, but he understood and admired Nala's affairs up to now. For this reason, he didn't want such a person to die in vain. Sorry, Nala still did not waver in the slightest. If Sacred Valley really had a solution, Nala would probably cooperate. But considering their actions up to this point, Sacred Valley had only been using an extreme method to prevent the coming of the Black Abyss. They would kill everyone with a Black Abyss trait, but they had no way to truly prolong the flames. Jason sighed and released the arrow without hesitation. Everyone had their own ideals and persistence. Nala was unwilling to change her mind, so why should he be willing to do so? If Nala couldn't even defeat him, then it would be useless for her to go to the Sacred Valley. If she could defeat him, then she would be qualified to go on. The dragon scale sword swung forward and cut the arrow in half. Nala jumped off her horse and slowly walked towards Jason. At the same time, she told her followers, "This is my battle. Just wait for my victory. No, this is our opportunity to show our worth," my lord, Alkurs admonished. "Although we do not wish for your lordship to become the torch, if your lordship has determined yourself to do so, the only thing we should do is to support your lordship with all our might. There is not much time left. The Lord's pace shouldn't be delayed, so I will deal with this person." Alkurs dismounted, drew his sword, and stopped in front of Nala. "My lord, please focus on going to the Sacred Valley." "I understand." Nala looked at the firm face under Alkurs' helmet with a bright smile, jumped back on her horse, and set off towards Sacred Valley. "May glory be with you." Holding his sword in hand, Alkurs charged towards Jason and firmly declared, "I am a knight. I shall execute the will of my lord, and I shall emerge victoriously." Jason squinted his eyes, but his expression under the mask didn't change. He raised his bow as red rays of light surged forth and infused themselves into the bow and arrow. A crimson streak of light then shot out towards the charging Alkurs. He didn't want to waste time on these knights. What he should be doing right now is to prevent Nala from going to Sacred Valley. That red streak of light was the ability he gained from Sacred Valley, which he believed could deal with this knight. Sacred Valley was famous for its methods of killing, but no matter what kind of injuries their members received outside, they could be healed as long as they returned to the Sacred Valley. This was because the Sacred Valley had the best method of healing on this entire continent in their possession, the Spring of Life. The Spring of Life worked the same way that its name suggested. The water surging forth from the spring was life and vitality itself, and drinking this water allowed one to heal the majority of a person's wounds and diseases. The reason why the Sacred Valley's assassins excelled at killing was because the bodies of every Sacred Valley assassin had been trained to its limit. If ordinary people without innate talent and reasonable means were to perform extreme exercises like they did, they would only break from overworking their body. But this problem was non-existent for the Sacred Valley, thanks to the Spring of Life. In other words, as long as you had enough willpower and was willing to train hard under the care of Spring of Life, anyone could reach the limit of their own body. Apart from this, the Spring of Life also had another function. For example, Jason's modification as a blood burner. Their hearts were modified to form a connection with Spring of Life, which allowed them to store a terrifying amount of life force. Blood burners were able to utilize this excess life force to exert all sorts of incredible power. Naturally, not everyone could take the blood burner modification. Even with a suitable physique and constitution, the success rate wasn't high. Jason initially rejected the modification because he was afraid that the transformation would not succeed and he could not take his revenge. But afterwards, when he fell to the verge of death and was transformed into an undead by Smick with his cutlass that had been turned into a ceremonial blade, without Negary's germs to supplement him, his body began to rot away little by little, forcing him to undergo this modification. After his modification, Jason could burn the excess life force and inject it into his weapons, increasing the power of the attack and grant it the red aura of life, which had a restraining effect on certain entities. Don't underestimate me. Alkurs' mouth and nose were constantly maintaining rhythmic breathing, The sword in his hand shined with metallic luster and easily shattered the red streak of light shot by Jason. The bolt fell to the ground into small pieces that scorched the ground that they fell on. Before I fall, I will definitely not let you interfere with my lord's actions. Alkers raised a sword that once again gleamed with a metallic luster. School of Steel. Alkers Lewis. Jason watched as Nala and the others galloped away on horseback, turned his head to face Alkers, and raised his bow once more. His hoarse voice seemed a lot more serious now. Bloodburner, Jason Todd. Jason knocked several arrows on his bow. The red rays of light circulated around his body and were injected into the arrows, swiftly turning them into red streaks of light that shot forward. Alkers wielded his sword to defend himself as he continued to move toward Jason. The School of Steel, one of the schools of respiratory art, was characterized by its unbreakable defensive power. They would be your most reliable shield and support. As long as they did not die, they would continue to hold up the line of defense. These people with die-hard perseverance are the most unbearable of all. They are really hard to deal with Jason's side. He understood people like Alkers. Once they had a goal, they would not give it up even at the cost of their lives, because he himself was such a person. Alkers was able to accurately strike and break each streak of light, but as they shattered, they would turn into scattered fragments and hit his armor. The impact wasn't strong, but they were extremely heated, causing even Alkers' armor to glow red from the temperature. His sweat turned into steam and spilled out from his armor. His skin was already burnt in several places. His hands became blistered from the heat of the sword and scratched by his grip on the sword, severely wounding it as he fought. Alkers rushed in front of Jason, turned his sword sideways, and attacked Jason with it. Since his goal was to stop Nala from going to her death, he wasn't necessarily an enemy that must be killed. Knocking him down was enough. Naive, Jason did not evade and instead threw his bow and arrow aside, grabbed Alkers' sword with his bare hands. The red vitality around his body surged forward, infusing itself into Alkers' sword. The intense heat flowed from the blade to the hilt of the sword, stimulating Alkers' disfigured hands even further. Drop your sword. NES. Never. The knight ignored the burning smell of flesh coming from his hands and moved forward to headbutt Jason. Although your defense is strong, you can't isolate heat. My ability perfectly counters yours. Stop your attack. If this goes on, your body will not be able to stand it. Jason avoided Alkers' headbutt without trouble. Since other bloodburners were afraid of ruining their bodies, they always maintained a certain temperature when burning their life force. But since Jason was an undead, his limit was exceptionally high. To follow my lord and fight to defend my lord's beliefs. Only those with such glory are the knights. Alkers' metallic gleam shifted onto his body as he used all his strength to attack Jason. I am a knight, and I am not afraid to die. May the glory of my lord shine on me always. There's no helping it. Jason gritted his teeth. His heart frantically beat as more life force surged forward and turned into red vitality. The air became warped, then abruptly burst. Alkers' body was sent flying and landed upside down. Jason dragged his slightly broken body to his opponent's side and sighed. Still breathing, but can't be left without treatment. With such followers, Nala might just actually succeed, Jason said sadly as he looked towards the direction where Nala left. It was just that, regardless of whether Nala failed or succeeded, wouldn't death be the only thing welcoming her? Please take good care of him. Here's the payment. Jason put a bag of coins in the hands of the villagers and pointed to the heavily burned Alkers in the house. Fortunately, he had brought some spring of life water with him. Otherwise, with this degree of burns, Alkers could die from complications at any time. Jason then continued to pursue Nala and the others. No matter what, if he had a chance to prevent that kind of tragedy, he would have to try. Even more so, since he received news from Sacred Valley's intelligence network that there were signs of Negary's ghostmen moving to ambush Nala. He still had a grudge to settle with the ghostmen Kadis who killed his entire family. Lord Negary, the ambushing force is ready. With the Ghostmen as the main force, they will try their best to assault Nala and stimulate her dragon bloodline. Granny Sealy spoke to a box with Golden Soul's blood rippling inside. But are you sure that there won't be any issues? With so many Ghostmen dispatched, what if Nala can't reach Sacred Valley? Granny Sealy asked worriedly. Trust Nala. If she can't overcome this little bit of hardship, she can forget saving the world. Negary's voice came from the soul's blood. Understood. Then, how was the outcome of the battle between Lord Negary and Eldridge? Granny Sealy nodded, then asked. At another location, Negary was walking on the street. His sturdy body, perfect appearance, and fatal charisma attracted the attention of many people. Did you not foresee it, Granny Sealy? Negary's words were implying something. I took Eldridge's head with my own hands. I cannot. This old lady has only released the first stage of my origin. As the statue of the last god and Lord Negary's dragon's pressure was at the scene, this old lady could not foresee the situation there. Granny Sealy's voice was full of reverence. Lord Negary is indeed invincible. Yes, Eldridge was only a disqualified king, so he naturally wouldn't be Lord Negary's match. Hearing Granny Sealy's words, Negary's hand stroked his own chest, and then said with a smile, although Eldridge was not a qualified combatant, he is a qualified king. Really, this evaluation? Granny Sealy said with a weird tone. Then, Lord Negary, will you be returning soon? No, I will leave the command of Nala's matter to you. If things go badly, I will send. Noah. Negary was standing in front of a gorgeous building with a happy smile on his face. Before that, there is one more thing that needs to be done. Then I wish Lord Negary all the best, Granny Sealy said with a smile. In front of Negary, two people wearing knight armor came forward. Both of them placed their hands on the hilt of their swords. One of them asked sharply, Who are you, sir? Why are you standing in front of the Grand Cathedral? Indeed, Negary was currently in Marlow, the capital of Intercam. The magnificent building in front of him was the Grand Cathedral of the Church of Divine Grace, which could also be considered to be their headquarters. The knights and priests of the church were all bestowed their divine graces in this place. Ordinary believers would also be allowed to enter for worshiping after performing a cleansing ceremony at the side door. The main door of the cathedral would only be opened when grand ceremonies are held. There would be no issues if it was any normal person standing at the door to admire the structure. But Negary's presence was simply too strong. Just by standing there, it felt as if he was the center of the world. The ominous but alluring, peculiar sense of charm he gave off made it so that one's heart would beat faster from more than just panic. Oh yes, please answer, or else I will detain you for disrespect of the Lord. The Knight of Divine Grace had cold sweat running down his forehead from just facing Negary, his hand trembling as he drew his sword while the grace of protection glimmered on his body. Behind him, the other Knight of Divine Grace also drew his sword, then slashed his comrade without hesitation. Fresh blood splattered all around and made the bystanders scream and flee in panic. Lord Negary, your servant greets you. The eyes of this Knight of Divine Grace was practically glowing with fanaticism. Inform all our lurkers. No matter the cost, drag as much of the forces of the Church of Divine Grace out as possible. Negary advanced as his interference force surged forward, struck, and shattered the large stone gate into rubble. The commotion here caused many knights and priests of Divine Grace to take action, but a few companions who were originally amiable suddenly displayed fanatical expressions on their faces and ambushed them from behind, causing many casualties. At the same time, in the distant sky, a large array of dark clouds gradually moved closer, carrying with them resounding noises that alarmed the entire capital. As the black clouds obscured the sun, black snowflakes started to fall from the sky. But only when the snowflakes landed did people discover that they were patches of black feathers with a rancid, foul stench permeating from them. Negary continued to walk towards the depths of the Grand Cathedral. Anything that tried to block Negary's way, whether they were a person or a wall, was unable to put up any reasonable resistance in front of Negary's peak of power. All obstacles were easily ripped to shreds in mere moments. Vile creature, you will never take another step forward. A large number of knights of divine grace had gathered in a corridor and raised their knights' swords in front of themselves. My Lord's grace declares me to be just. I shall cut through the darkness, and evil will be punished. The knights of divine grace shined with the grace they were granted and rushed towards Negary. Julius. As he uttered the Drakatung syllable, Negary's footsteps didn't stop. Each and every one of the knights of divine grace collapsed where they stood. Their armor shattered and broke. Their blood and limbs were strewn all around. Negary continued to walk through the corridor full of blood. As Negary passed by the body of a knight who stood near the back that was soaked in the pool of blood, he paused slightly before continuing forward. After Negary had left, the knight began to tremble. His eyes opened to look at the corpses in front of him. His tears mixed with blood as it flowed down his face, due to being at the back of the formation, and because he instinctively felt that something was wrong, he managed to use the grace of protection in time. That made it so that he was seriously injured but didn't die, after which he instinctively lay down and played dead, escaping from death. Negary's pause was purposeful. It was to let him know that Negary had noticed but decided to spare him. An unprecedented sense of fear and humiliation encroached on his soul, but he had to admit that he felt a hidden sense of relief in his heart. Albeit, it was foreseeable that the rest of his life would be spent living in the shadows of this experience. Negary waved his hand to break down the door, only to be greeted with a knight wielding a glowing white sword. Negary's scaly hand reached out to block the knight's sword, then grabbed and pulled it towards him while his fingers stabbed forward. His nails pierced through the flesh of the knight's lower jaw, went into his throat, broke his spine, and tore through his skin on the back, swiftly taking the man's resolute expression down together with his head. Negary then waved his hand and smashed the severed head into a knight of divine grace rushing at him. Negary maintained his pace and continued his gradual advance. Devil, you are a devil. Dragon's pressure, combined with Negary's imposing manner increased by his every step, coupled with his understanding of humans made it, so that his every gesture stimulated the spirit of the knights of divine grace. As Negary approached, some of them couldn't bear this psychological pressure, screamed in horror, and rushed towards Negary, only to be killed with a swat of Negary's hands. More and more knights of divine grace were gathering, together with the church's own troops of knights in training. Under the priest's grace of fearlessness, they chanted "My Lord" as they charged at Negary from every direction. As Negary's dragon's pressure expanded, it felt like a heavy stone that pressed against their hearts. If not for the priest's grace of fearlessness, they wouldn't even dare to charge forward. Soul, another Drakatung syllable, meaning the power of levitation, symbolizing the control of the dragons over the sky. Its specific usage was to allow a life form to be able to take flight. Within the range of Negary's dragon's pressure, a force began to act on these knights' bodies and made their bodies lighter. They were all charging forward, preparing to attack, but the sudden lightness of their bodies made it so that they couldn't react before they crashed into one another. All of them floated like balloons, colliding against one another in the air, vainly struggling to stabilize themselves. The most normal reactions were muscle strains, vomiting, dizziness, heartbeat pausing, as well as various other abnormal conditions that completely immobilized this force. Of course, if they could adapt to this state, it wouldn't be hard to fly under the effect of this power, but they obviously have no time to adapt. Heal it. Negary grabbed a sword that fell on the ground and infused his power into it. Then with a wave of the sword, the blade cracked and broke into tiny pieces that scattered all around. Just like that, every knight in the air lost their lives and fell down to the ground. When a life form was no longer alive, the power of the levitation, Drakatung, would also lose its effect on their bodies. This way, they wouldn't even have the chance to pretend to be dead. Enough Negary! This is the Church of Divine Grace. It is the abode of God. The new Pope Donner walked out from the Grand Cathedral Divine Hall with a scepter in his hand, his face showing an expression of extraordinary anger. He had only just become the Pope of the Church of Divine Grace after much effort. Although the princess they supported did not inherit the throne, The influence of the church had finally managed to infiltrate Royas for the first time. On the current continent, most kingdoms only existed as self-governing states, with the two most powerful kingdoms being Turkam and Royas, which meant that as long as the Church of Divine Grace fully spread their influence into these two kingdoms, the others would not be able to resist their integration. Eventually, the Church of Divine Grace would become the faith of the entire continent, and his name, Wen Donner, would be written into the annals of history and become an object of admiration for countless people. He would bask in the light of God and become the greatest pope in the history of the church. And yet why? Why does Negary have to cause trouble at this point in time? Even capturing over half of the Grand Cathedral without much difficulty. What would happen to the pride of the Church of Divine Grace from now on? Only a fake Negary lightly said with a smile. From Eldridge, Negary understood the true face of the Church of Divine Grace's so-called God. This God wasn't even part of the divine race like the new deity and the last God. In essence, it was the leftovers of the last God when he torched himself to prolong the fire. Because the last God amalgamated the souls of too many other powerful entities in this world, not all of them could be completely burnt away. Although this unburnt entity also came out from the first flame, it was different from the first three gods. It didn't even have the qualifications to be used as fuel for the flames, and it was precisely because of its existence that evil spirits showed up in the first place. In a way, this entity could be considered the original evil spirit. However, this residue had a certain ability, because it was the amalgamation of the remnant souls of many combatants who once fused with the last God. It had acquired a unique ability. Its believers, if their faith was sturdy enough and their physique was suitable, it was able to grant them the power formed by the traits of those powerful entities of the past. This was the true nature of the Church's graces. What was even sadder was that, because it was a multiracial mixture who was burned by the flames, after the demise of the Second Empire, it had always been sealed inside those ruins. After so many years, it had given up on thinking. It was the first pope of the Church of Divine Grace who found the original evil spirit from the ruins and deified it. In fact, this God was nothing but a grace dispenser with only its instincts remaining. The ones who were truly in control of the Church of Divine Grace was the Council of Secret Gods. Even the Pope, Wen, knew very little about their God. Only after he had been the Pope for a long time and gradually became aware of the truth of their God would he be invited by the Council of Secret Gods. If he were to decline this invitation, he would be secretly dealt with, then publicly declared that God missed the Pope and had summoned the Pope back to heaven. Negary continued to move forward. His invincible, imposing manner, coupled with the expanding dragon's pressure, heavily struck their hearts. In this brief moment, even the Knights of Divine Grace who had been blessed by the grace of fearlessness couldn't help but take a step back. Negary, the Church of Divine Grace, is not a place you can act as you wish. God loves the world, Wen coldly declared. The scepter in his hand began to give off shining rays of light that enveloped everyone here, granting them the effects of every grace. This was the function of the Pope's inheritance scepter, temporarily granting all the graces of the Church to those chosen by the wielder. Salvation, understanding, vitality, justice, protection, sacrifice, temperance, fearlessness, tenacity, a total of 9 graces. Every knight and priest here were clad in blinding light, like angels who descended from above. At the same time, they all felt like being given a gift from God. The originally frightened knights, after being flooded with the 9 graces, felt their fear of death, their attachment to family members, and their reluctance to give up on life all vanished, leaving only God in their hearts. The Knights of Divine Grace, and even the priests, all charged towards Negary with vigor and fanaticism in their minds. Doesn't seem too bad. Negary waved his hand to stop an incoming sword swing. The scales on his palm were cracked, spilling a touch of golden blood. His hand then moved and slapped the knight's head, shattering his helmet and splattering his blood all over. The grace of tenacity allowed a person to not die immediately after a fatal strike. Normally, this wasn't very useful, so few chose to receive it, but it now played a crucial role. Several dozen rays of light flashed on this person at once. The large number of grace of salvation forcibly pulled him back from the brink of death and restored him to perfect health. Juliest. With this Dracatung syllable, an unstoppable force struck those who rushed at Negary. Their armor shattered and their blood spilled everywhere, but with an array of madly shining lights, these people who had discarded everything but God in their hearts, including pain, once again charged at Negary. Pseudo-immortality and unlimited healing. How ridiculous! Negary chuckled and raised his hand to the roof. His dragon's pressure surged forth as he uttered the unstoppable Dracatung syllable again. Juliest. The roof was blown away to reveal the sky above. At the next moment, a torrent of black poured in from a hole on the roof. The noise of crows filled the entire area, and the pitch-black feathers completely overwhelmed the light of the graces. Negary stood in the battlefield, shuffling between black and white, occasionally waving his hands to kill the enemies. The grace of tenacity could only delay death, not completely stop it. If the grace of salvation did not arrive in time, they would still lose their lives. The torrent of black and white gradually subsided as more red appeared in the area instead. The blood had stained everything red. Negary walked up the stairs step by step, approaching Lwyn, who was holding the scepter while trembling. Behind Negary, a large number of corpses had piled up with humans and crows among them, but the number of crows still won out in the end. At this point, some crows had even landed on top of the corpses and indifferently pecked at them like food. Not running away, Negary gave Lwyn some respect and asked, "I'm the messenger of God, and behind me is his divine hall. Evil creature, I will never let you take a single step inside." Lwyn trembled, but did not retreat any further. It had been 10 years since he escaped from Reastromia in panic. 10 years. The reason why he was so eager to climb up and develop the Church of Divine Grace was only partially because of his ambition and desire for power, while the remaining part was because of his fear. After leaving Rhea, he still felt fear every time he thought of Negary's strength. The deep sense of powerlessness continued to stimulate and push him forward. It was only by holding even more power in his hand did he feel like he was able to escape that fear. After becoming the Pope, he initially thought he could finally overcome that fear. But only when Negary appeared in front of them again did he realize how deep-rooted that fear was and felt despair. "God is with me." Lwyn looked straight at Negary right in front of himself and softly declared. He borrowed the influence of his family and mentor to become the cardinal, then the Pope. Borrowed the power of the Church of Divine Grace to influence the kingdom of Intercam, or perhaps even the entire continent. But all of this was useless against Negary. When all that he was dependent on had been stripped away, when he had no choice but to face this fear, Lwyn suddenly felt like there was nothing to fear in the first place. In such a situation, one would either be overwhelmed by fear and could no longer stand up, or they would face their fear and truly recognize themselves. Negary! Lwyn's body shined with a dazzling white light and swung the scepter in his hand to strike Negary with all his strength. "Your unyielding spirit, I shall accept." Negary evaded Lwyn's attack, pierced through Lwyn's chest with his palm, pulled out his beating heart, and directly crushed it. Then he slowly absorbed his soul essence. Lwyn's success was largely due to the influence of his family and mentors, but while there weren't many people with the same background he did in the Church of Divine Grace, there weren't few either. And yet among them all, why did only Lwyn manage to become the Pope? Regardless of anything else, one must admit that he had his own merits for his achievement. Negary pulled his hand back out and picked up the scepter. This scepter had a deep connection with the original evil spirit, being able to channel its full power for a short time to bestow the graces to many people. Without the help of the crows, even if Negary had taken his dragon form, it would have been difficult to fight against so many lunatics who had nothing but God in their hearts and support from the 9 graces at once. Breaking open the gate of the divine hall with a wave of his hand, the scenery inside revealed itself to Negary. A stone platform was enshrined at the center of the large hall, with various unidentified patterns etched onto it that looked extremely coordinated. Above the stone platform, there was an incandescent ball of light. Whenever the people of the Church of Divine Grace were bestowed their graces, they must come to this place, stand on the stone platform, and receive it from the ball of light through a special ceremony. Generally speaking, because of their physique, normal human beings could only bear up to 5 graces. An extraordinarily powerful human might be able to bear 6 graces, while the single most powerful knight of divine grace in history was able to bear a total of 7 graces. As Negary looked at the light ball floating in the air, his eyes were full of jest. If other people came here, they would feel a sacred sensation from the bottom of their hearts, as if the ball of light up there was truly the incarnation of God and the creator of all things. That ball of light itself probably thinks so too. As an entity that emerged from the first flame and the original evil spirit, it had actually been brainwashed by a group of ordinary people. How shameful. From the shadow of this divine hall, a few people in white robes came out. If Wen was here, he would recognize these people as some of the most veteran archbishops in the Church of Divine Grace. Negary, do you seek to blaspheme God? A white-robed man with a scar on his face coldly questioned. God? Negary slowly stepped forward. Let's not kid ourselves here. Although his soul physique exceeds mine, this thing dominated by the will of scums like you is definitely not God. Negary scoffed and made the expressions of everyone here change. For the Council of the Secret Gods, it didn't matter if the Church of Divine Grace was destroyed. As long as they still had control over the original evil spirit and could continue to bestow the graces upon believers, they could always rebuild a new Church of Divine Grace. If the secret of the Church came to light, the dignity of God would be no more. God would become a mere treasure that anyone could control, and the Church of Divine Grace would become a target for all. If they still had their Knights of Divine Grace, they would be able to fend off most of those greedy gazes. But since the Church had just been slaughtered by Negary, if this secret were to be exposed, they would be hunted down by the whole continent. You had better think about how to save your own lives first. Negary held the Pope's scepter and continued walking towards the people of the Council of Secret Gods. Negary, your biggest mistake was to covet the Pope's scepter, another bald, white-robed man declared with a cold laugh. Do you think we left this thing to the Pope without any countermeasures? The scepter in Negary's hand suddenly shone with a dazzling white light, causing Negary to feel his soul form becoming unstable as it was being sucked towards the scepter. The main material of that Pope's scepter was the souls of the previous generations of rebellious divine grace personnel. Through the countermeasure, that light allows the scepter to devour the soul of its wielder. An old man with a white beard among them chuckled as he spoke. Dick, you've said too much. The scar-faced white-robed man turned and admonished the white-bearded old man. Even though being sucked into the Pope's scepter like this would mean the end for Negary anyways, some secrets were better off kept to themselves. But the white-bearded old man, Dick, didn't pay him any attention at all and continued. I have prepared all the documents about using souls to forge weapons, Lord Negary. Well done. Dick Negary waved the scepter and smashed the scar-faced man's head in. The other members of the Council of the Secret Gods frantically cursed at Dick, not understanding why he would betray the Council in the first place. They then tried to use the original evil spirit to repel Negary, only to find that Negary also knew how to control the original evil spirit, and Negary's spiritual power was much stronger than theirs. In the end, they were killed off one by one in despair by Negary. Lord Negary is truly powerful enough for anyone to despair, Dick said flatteringly. The wrinkles on his face had all churned together to form something that resembled a smile. This man, Dick Thacker, was the biggest traitor that Negary had instigated in the Church of Divine Grace, and the main reason why he was spurred into betrayal was that he was old. Although he had joint control of the original evil spirit, had the grace of vitality transplanted into his body, and maintained decent daily care of himself, he had simply lived for too long. He could feel his life coming to an end, and so he chose to follow Negary and sold out the council of the secret gods. Negary turned to him, summoned a crow over, and pierced through the crow's body with his finger. Some black substance could be seen seeping out from the crow's body onto his finger. He then tapped the finger on Dick Thacker's forehead. The black substance then became animated and crawled into the man's body through his skin. Your body will gradually be replaced by the black crow germs, but vitality doesn't come out of thin air. You will need to consume the lives of others in order to maintain the black crow germs activity. But you probably don't mind that little trouble. Thank you, Lord Negary. Thank you, Lord Negary. The germs on Dick's forehead continued to permeate into his body and caused him to fall into the pool of blood of his previous colleagues from the exceptional pain, but he was still madly thanking Negary out of joy. Don't mess this up, Negary took the original evil spirit and walked away. The crows were carrying several books in groups. These are the knowledge from the Church of Divine Grace that Dick provided. A large number of crows landed on Negary's shoulder and brought him to the sky, flying towards the sacred valley. The last few mysteries that this world had left to offer would be revealed at that place. Princess Nala, please hurry. Leave this to me, said a knight of divine grace as he held up his rusty knight's sword and faced a large mud-like monster. The world was becoming more abnormal by the day. As the black abyss approached, the sky had turned dim and gray, as if there was always a layer of dark clouds above. Additionally, as the black abyss arrived, some people also began to mutate. Their skin and flesh began to fester like a skinned frog. From time to time, they would shed pieces of flesh from their bodies or even lose their humanoid appearance. Their bones would begin to melt, turning their entire bodies into a pool of mud with tentacles for limbs. These monsters seemed to be particularly hostile towards humans, almost as if they were their natural predators. Once they pounced on a person, their flesh and skin would melt. When struck by weapons, the weapons would corrode extremely rapidly. Even elite and veteran mercenaries had died at these monsters' hands with just a bit of carelessness. The more people that these monsters ate, the larger they would grow without an apparent limit. And the most terrifying thing of all was that these monsters couldn't be killed. Fortunately, there weren't many of these monsters for now, with most of them only showing up in remote areas. The more prosperous a city area was, the fewer of these monsters manifested, so they hadn't caused a large disturbance yet. However, time wasn't on their side. These mutations were ongoing, and things were still changing by the minute. Nala could also feel some sort of power trying to alter her, but being forcefully held back by the dragon's blood inside her body. However, she could also sense that as long as she gave into it, she would be able to obtain great power. Nala and the others encountered this damn monster when they were passing by a village. Soon after this monster manifested, it had slaughtered the entire village and grew to the size of a house like it currently was. As they rode past this village, the tentacles of the mud monsters suddenly swept out, eliminating all of their horses. Quite a few of the people of the church, as well as Nala's follower knights, were also struck by the tentacles before they could react. Many of them died on the spot, and more died in the battle that ensued. Nala and the others had tried a lot of ways to kill the monster, but it seemed that something was supporting it, keeping alive. Despite the monster's size and muddy stature, it wasn't slow. Combined with its disgusting method of attack, if they had tried to ignore it and run, more people would have been killed instead. As a last resort, the Knight of Divine Grace suggested that he stay back to stop the monster, or else the entire group would be stuck here with it. From the surrounding environments, it could be seen that the black abyss was getting closer and closer by the minute. The light of the flames was dying, and their time was running out. My Lord promised me the right to sacrifice. God is with me. A dazzling white light manifested on the Knight of Divine Grace as his grace of sacrifice had been activated. It truly must be said, although the Church's God was only a fake, the grace it bestowed upon people did indeed require special qualities. These normal people of the Church of Divine Grace naturally must possess those special qualities, and were praiseworthy in one way or another. As the Knight of Divine Grace held his sword and rushed towards the monster, Nala's eyes flashed briefly, turned around, and declared, "All members, Retreat. Do not let his sacrifice be in vain. As the white light erupted, the monster's body was blown to bits, but under the influence of some kind of power, it quickly gathered again, swallowed the body of the knight, and grew a bit larger. The negotiations had stalled. Though the kingdom of Royas had compromised on several points, one demand remained immovable. The peace treaty must be signed by Nala herself. Everyone knew it was more than a symbolic gesture. Nala was no mere delegate. She was Intercam's saintress of salvation, a princess, and in all likelihood, its future queen. For Royas to insist she sign the treaty in person was not diplomacy. It was a trap. The nobles rejected the demand outright at first. Many had once deserted Nala when political tides shifted, but shame and guilt over that decision had fostered a newfound sense of pride, or at least the appearance of it. They called it the bottom line of nobility, a final shred of dignity they claimed to uphold. But as the days passed, that pride began to crumble. Rumors spread that the Royas army was reorganizing and preparing for war once more. Royas had made it clear, if Intercam wouldn't agree, then peace talks were over. And just like that, public opinion shifted. It's just a signature. There's no real danger. Isn't she the saintress? Isn't it her duty to bring peace? These whispers turned into voices, and the voices became pressure. The same nobles who once praised her valor began questioning her resolve. They branded her hesitation as selfish, an unwillingness to sacrifice for the greater good. After all, if she truly was the saintress, shouldn't she be the first to act? Worse, they twisted her silence into arrogance. She's just a lucky village girl, they muttered. Anyone in her place could have done the same. Her title is just a name. But their words were full of contradiction. They wanted her to go, to safeguard their peace and protect their interests. Yet, deep down, they hoped she would go, not just to prove her title hollow, but to validate their own betrayal. If Nala walked to her death willingly, it meant she wasn't above them after all. For King Seth I, however, there was no ambiguity. He wanted her dead. With Nala gone, there would be no challenge to his rule, no rival queen, no saintress to outshine his throne. Eventually, the last layer of noble resistance fell. They broke what little remained of their self-respect and agreed. Nala must go. Among the common people, there was no outrage. Despite the respect and admiration they held for Nala, few opposed the decision. Some even supported it. They believed salvation came at a cost, and that cost, they reasoned, was Nala. She is the saintress. Isn't it her job to suffer for the rest of us? Only the Church of Divine Grace remained divided. Upper clergy who had helped raise Nala now opposed sending her, fearing the loss of their greatest symbol and their ticket to power. But others saw opportunity. If Nala went to Royas willingly, it would open the door for the church to expand its influence there. If war resumes, they argued, Royas will shun us forever. But if we seal peace through her, they may welcome us in. In the end, Pope Wen silenced the dissent. Wielding the scepter of divine grace, he addressed them with cold resolve. The black abyss is rising. We have no time. The light of God must reach beyond Intercam. This is our moment. He remembered the day he first persuaded Nala to step forward. And now, he might be sending her to die, but his conviction didn't waver. Everything I do for the world. During those tense days, Nala paid no attention to court debates or whispering nobles. She stayed home beside her mother. Isabella looked far older than her age. The hardships of a life spent scraping by had taken their toll. When Nala was born, she hadn't had the luxury to rest. Work began again the very next day. Now, she held her daughter's hand, pleading, Nala, don't go. Don't follow your father's path. She remembered all too well how Jacob, her husband, had been pushed to sacrifice himself for the greater good. The crowd had cheered him on, only to forget him after his death. Now history was repeating itself. Nala squeezed her mother's hand gently. But it's the right thing to do, she said softly. If I do nothing and war begins again, I'll regret it forever. She smiled, not with confidence, but with kindness. You were the one who taught me, remember? When faced with a hard choice, Do what you believe is right. Isabella's eyes filled with sorrow. Back then, she had supported her husband's choice. Now, she wanted to stop her daughter, but found she couldn't. She had helped shape Nala into the saintress of salvation, and now she couldn't pull her back. As Nala left the manor, the crowd erupted in cheers. But to Isabella, those cheers sounded hollow, unworthy. They had forgotten that it was Nala's actions that earned her the title, not the title that demanded her sacrifice. They don't deserve her. With Nala's agreement, the treaty advanced rapidly. Only one step remained, a ceremonial signing at the border between Royas and Intercam. A delegation was assembled. Church missionaries, noble escorts, and the saintress herself. On the day of departure, a group of armored knights rode in. They dismounted and knelt before her. Leading them was Alkers Lewis, heir to the famed School of Steel. "Your Excellency Nala, please allow us to accompany you," he said. Nala smiled. "Alkers, weren't you just granted a peerage? Didn't you say you were discussing marriage with the daughter of an earl? There's no need for you to come." Alkers stood. He drew his knight's sword and raised it in both hands, its polished surface catching the morning light. "Those things mean nothing now," he said firmly. Behind him, the knights did the same, blades raised before their faces in solemn unity. "We are knights," they declared in unison, "and we are not afraid to die." Surrounded by crows, Negary walked towards the entrance of the cave. Inside the cave entrance was a relatively spacious flight of stairs that led all the way down with no end in sight. Both sides of the stairs were inlaid with luminous stones to provide lighting. At the same time, as soon as Negary entered this place, his perception field was immediately suppressed by a certain force and couldn't extend too far. No wonder the ghostmen broke contact after entering this place. In this environment, it would be difficult for me to contact the outside world even through the soul's blood. Negary continued downward without hesitation. Along the way, more corpses could be seen. Most of them were assassins of Sacred Valley. There are also a few crowmen and dragonmen corpses, and even a single ghostman who fell here, but no Hales members at all. But if one gave it some thought, most Hales members had the Black Abyss trait, and now that the Black Abyss was coming closer, they would most likely acquire a part of the Black Abyss power and turn into those mud monsters much more easily. While becoming a mud monster made you very strong, the prize for that was the complete loss of sentience and turning into an irrational monster. Even the people of Hales could not control them, only setting them wild on the continent and further weakening the flame. The Hales members who attacked Sacred Valley most likely only included the 3 members of the 4 Sides of God who had returned to their positions, and a few people who did not possess the Black Abyss trait. "Ah, mortals covered by the ashes, you can't resist God. I have transcended mere appearance and have become the face of God." The sound of a huge impact came from below, accompanied by a loud noise. "So they are fighting below?" Negary walked down at a steady pace that wasn't too fast nor too slow. By what the voice just declared, it wasn't hard to guess whose voice that belonged to one of the 4 Sides of God, but the one fighting against him was unclear. Idane, one of the few blood burners of the Sacred Valley, was burning with flames of red vitality, illuminating his surroundings. Around him were several spots of white light. He understood at a glance that they were the people of the Church of Divine Grace who were fully supporting him with their graces. The world was impermanent. Not too long ago, they were still clashing swords against one another, but now they were on a united front against a common enemy. And the enemy in question was a shroud of darkness that had completely engulfed them, the dazzled who represented the unseeable side of God. If someone was exposed to this darkness, they would be completely swallowed up by it. If not for the red light of vitality around himself, he would have already lost his life long ago. But besides this devouring power, there was something else inside the darkness that was constantly attacking him as well. With a groan, one of the spots of white light near him slowly faded away. Obviously, another person from the church was unable to endure and was swallowed up by the darkness. "TSK, what are you still persevering for?" The voice in the darkness sounded again. "Life is nothing but a scam, The flame used emotions as chains to bind you. By breaking away from those shackles, you will see the true face of the world. Damn it, what should I do? Idane was keeping this light up through burning his life force, so he was very anxious. Although he remained here voluntarily to keep the enemy busy, that didn't mean he was willing to die like this. Yes. Feeling a breath of danger around him, Idane reflexively rolled to one side, but was still a step too late. His left hand was sliced off by an unknown object or entity, and the pain numbed his mind. Right away, the life force stored inside his heart surged forth to stop the bleeding at his wrist. But this was meaningless. Healing his wounds caused his life force to run out even quicker, slowly extinguishing the light of vitality around his body. As the darkness crept in closer, he could feel his everything being devoured by the darkness. I couldn't even retaliate, defeated without being able to do anything. I truly am weak. Idane collapsed to the darkness. The red light around him gradually faded away. Perhaps it was his imagination, but before he completely lost his life, he could feel a sound and the pain of his entire body being torn apart. Juliest. The irresistible force surged forward, ripping the darkness that lingered inside the cave to shreds. But the people struggling inside the darkness were also struck by this power. As they were barely able to resist the power of the darkness, their bodies and lives were ripped to shreds together with the darkness by the power of the Drakaton. Negary slowly walked forward, glanced at the bunch of collateral damage before he turned to the dazzled inside the darkness. These people could never stall you, so what are your plans by stopping here? Negary, the dazzled hiding in the darkness, shouted with gnashing teeth. Before Hales found him, the ideal dazzled was supposed to be Negary, which made him feel like he was only a substitute. And now that the original had appeared before him, and even ruined his joy of hunting, the dazzled only felt more hatred towards Negary. It's good that you're here. I will kill you and prove that I am definitely stronger than you are. The dazzled declared, full of malice. His darkness surged forth like a tidal wave that crashed down towards Negary. The closer the black abyss approaches, the stronger my power will be. Negary, you are limited to the power of evil spirits and could never win against me, who has obtained the power of the black abyss. The dazzled's voice echoed in the darkness, quickly surrounding Negary. How unsightly, Negary said mockingly as he felt the darkness constantly absorbing his power and when he heard the dazzled's words. This so-called dazzled, before becoming the dazzled, was nothing but a newborn rational evil spirit. His current power was only obtained through Hales piling resources on him. So compared to Negary and Eldridge, his willpower was pathetically weak. Like a castle in the sky, everything about him was built on the basis of that bestowed power. The cluster of white light in Negary's hand lit up, became stronger and stronger, then swiftly repelled everything around him, including the darkness, the stairs beneath his feet. Even the air around him was driven away. The grace of justice, in the Church of Divine Grace's description, was the ability to reject all entities that one believed to be unjust. In essence, it was the ability to turn one's willpower into repulsive force and excluded everything they deemed to be wrong. And no one knew for sure exactly how powerful Negary's will actually was. The darkness itself was powerful, but the willpower of the one controlling it was insignificant. As the light dispelled the darkness, Negary walked straight forward with his justice in hand and directly grabbed the dazzled who was hiding within the darkness. Caught you, bug. The thing in his hand was a deformed humanoid evil spirit. After the darkness was dispelled, he kept trying to retreat, waving his hands to conceal his ugly appearance. Putting just a bit of force into his hands, he crushed the dazzled to pieces, but just as Negary was about to absorb its soul essence to obtain more information, those things disappeared following some sort of power. The Black Abyss? Negary put the original evil spirit away and continued to move forward. It truly must be said, although the original evil spirit only had its instincts left, it was still very useful. Negary continued forward as the sound of fighting kept resounding from ahead of him. Perhaps the distance had been shortened enough, as the connection of Soul's blood was re-established and informed Negary of what was going on. Nala was wielding the dragon scale sword and fighting several ghostmen at once. Her dragon's pressure grew stronger and stronger as the battle went on, proving that her dragon bloodline was quickly awakening. "Young Lady Nala, that is the way. You must defeat them to qualify passing through this door," Granny Sid's voice echoed. She commanded the dragon men to guard a gate of bones. A spring of water was right next to the gate, which was the spring of life of Sacred Valley. There were a total of 3 ghost men going up against Nala, the traitor of the Church of Divine Grace, captain of the ghost men, Myerson, who had Chris Remnant's soul implanted, the big fatty Connor Kenway, who had the ability to reflect damage, as well as a new ghost man who was implanted with Ellis Remnant's soul. Other than that, there were several more battles around the area. The Avenger Jason Todd, who had caught up to Nala, was fighting against the pure villain Cadiz Mareg, a battle of vengeance that Jason had been looking forward to for 17 years. Reese, who was originally hidden in the darkness, was leading 3 knights against the ghostmen Jack the Killer, while the remaining assassins of Sacred Valley were keeping some Croman busy. As for Noah, Negary's righteous, he was wearing a black robe and stood silently by the Gate of Bones, watching these battles. Despicable. Nala dodged the big iron ball that Connor swung, brandished her sword to slay the false things created by Ellis, then turned to receive Myerson's sword, being attacked by 3 ghost men at once, especially one of them being Myerson, who understood her respiratory art. Made this battle feel really uncomfortable. Myerson's secondary soul was Chris, Nala's first respiratory art teacher. Although he couldn't use respiratory art, due to being an undead, he understood everything related to respiratory art, well enough that his attacks were always aimed at Nala's awkward spots. Nala actually recognized this person in front of her. She knew him as a Greenhorn Knight who she met when she was young, and knew that it was his betrayal that caused the crusade against Negary to become a complete defeat. And right now, Nala could even vaguely perceive the existence of Chris from his body. So she had to defeat these people, both to prevent the advent of the Black Abyss and to avenge Chris, who taught her respiratory art. The scene in front of her eyes abruptly flashed, and Nala found herself standing on a sunshine-filled field of grass. Her hands that had grown full of calluses from holding a sword had turned back into smooth, jade-like hands, and her armor turned into a small sundress. On the other side of the grassy field was a lake with a small, cozy wooden cabin right next to it. The young Isabella and a very kind-looking man were standing in front of the wooden house, waving at her. This was the scene that Nala desired most when she was still a child, where her mother did not grow weary and old from overworking herself, and her often talked about father was still alive and stayed by her mother's side. With a smile on her face, Nala turned around and slashed with her sword, cutting the illusion open. Her faith had never wavered for even a moment. Her dragon scale sword clashed against Myerson's knight's sword. Her dragon's pressure surged forward and grew a bit stronger again. The stairs where Negary was standing abruptly split open. A monster jumped forth from the crack, opened its huge jaws to try and swallow Negary whole. "Trying to ambush me?" Negary stopped watching Nala. His body became indistinct as he evaded the oncoming assault. The monster's gigantic jaw felt like a bottomless black hole, representing the monster's identity. One of the 3 sides of God in Hale's possession, the unfathomable chopped hand, the one who replaced Ellis' position. R.A. Betas. An intense suction manifested in the air around the monster and seemed to cause even the light around it to be swallowed up. The crows that followed Negary up to this point were unable to evade and were sucked into the mouth, after which their connection with Negary was immediately cut off. Through this sensation, Negary knew where the monster's huge jaw led. It was the Black Abyss that still hadn't fully returned. Anything sucked inside would be sent into the Black Abyss, erased by the Black Abyss, and become a part of the Black Abyss. The monster squirmed and directed all of its suction power towards Negary. Juliest. Negary reached his hand forward. The power that represented the unstoppable dragon surged forward, shattered everything in front of him, and ripped the monster's body into pieces, but that didn't stop its advance. For the chopped hand, the body isn't crucial. The only important thing was its huge jaw that symbolized the connection with the Black Abyss. Although the power of Dracatongue destroyed its body, it wasn't able to destroy that gate-like mouth. How powerful Negary looked at the approaching giant mouth and commented. He had to admit, being restricted by both this world and his own limits, he could not become any stronger. So these things had surpassed him by borrowing the Black Abyss power and surpassed this world's limitations. Fortunately, I obtained this Negary, took the original evil spirit out. Otherwise, it would have been really troublesome to face this thing. If the quality of Negary's current soul had exceeded the first stage of release of Origin and was equivalent to the peak of the first stage, then the giant mouth had reached the second stage of release through borrowing the power of the Black Abyss. The original evil spirit was forged by the flames from the remnant souls of the strongest entities in this world during the era of the First Empire. At the time, quite a few of those entities had reached power equivalent to the third stage of release. After so many years of consuming its own power, it was no longer as great as it was before. But the quality of its soul was still far superior to Negary's own. Negary abandoned the ball of light in his hand and threw it straight into the gigantic mouth of the chopped hand without any reluctance. The grace of sacrifice was already activated, but only after going into the mouth did the original evil spirit thoroughly erupt. The chopped hand wailed silently as it frantically devoured the surrounding rubble and air, but nothing it did was able to prevent its pitch-black mouth from slowly collapsing, recovered by some sort of force, and disappeared. Negary continued to move forward. So far, 2 of the 4 sides of Hale's God had been defeated. Only the cut tongue that had never been seen, who represented the unspeakable side of God, and the decapitated, who represented the unreasonable side of God, remained. Hale's actions this time around seemed very strange. From her standpoint, what they should be doing right now was to prevent Nala from prolonging the first flame with all their power, as this would make it more convenient for the Black Abyss to arrive. But in truth, the Dazzled was making a joke of being stalled by a few people, while the chopped hand was lying here in ambush. Quite obviously, there must be some sort of secret involved, but none of that mattered. Regardless of what happened, Hizzle could not be stopped. Whether there was a scheme or a secret that could not be seen, there was only a single thing that he needed to do. Conquer, then dominate. This can't go on, Nala thought to herself. The feeling of oppression coming from the Black Abyss was getting heavier and heavier. It had already gotten so close to this world that if she didn't prolong the flames soon, this world would really be finished. Nala was barely able to hold her own against these 3 at once, and it was basically impossible for her to defeat them. Myerson's wasn't much weaker than she was when it came to close combat, so it wasn't easy to defeat him. Furthermore, Ellis was constantly interfering with their battle through creating falsehood, and Connor, who rarely attacked but always forced her to dodge every time he did. Even a little bit of negligence would result in her defeat. All of a sudden, Nala's complexion changed. Her beautiful blonde hair began to wither, numerous dark spots started to appear on her skin, followed by a sense of dizziness. Nala propped her body up with her sword, half leaning on it, as she gave Myerson a complicated look. At this time, Myerson had the same afflictions Nala did, and to a much more serious degree. The reason why he betrayed the Church of Divine Grace and pledged his allegiance to Negary in the first place was because of the illnesses and diseases that plagued this world. After implanting Chris' remnant soul, he obtained the ability that he had always desired: disease synchronization. Through this ability, he would resonate with an ill person and become afflicted with the same disease they were, after which his body could generate a curing germ to treat the disease. Furthermore, this cure could also slowly spread and integrate itself into the environment, which meant that with every cure he completed, there would permanently be 1 less disease in this world. Although Myerson was technically the captain of the Ghostmen, he hadn't led them much at all. Most of the time, he would be traveling the continent, constantly using his ability to record new diseases while spreading their cure and vaccines at the same time. Among the people here, Myerson was the one who had probably saved the most people. His body had now recorded over 100 types of diseases, and whenever he needed to fight, he could use reverse synchronization to spread the diseases that he recorded onto the people he was resonating with. And the price for this was that regardless of whether he was recording a new disease or reverse infecting others with them, every disease he recorded within his body would violently act up every time he used the ability. Because Nala had the dragon bloodline, her immune system was powerful, but even she couldn't be immune to over 100 kinds of diseases at once. Furthermore, as the ability only synchronized the symptoms, she couldn't use respiratory art to expel the germs from her body, as there were no actual germs to expel. The records and documents that Eldridge provided included a lot of information about Negary and his subordinates. So as soon as Nala saw Meyerson, who looked even sicker than she was, she instantly understood Meyerson's ability. At the same time, she couldn't understand a man called Meyerson. He betrayed his companions, pledged his life to the evil Negary, held the soul of her mentor Chris within his body, thus blaspheming the dead, all of which were unforgivable acts. However, in order to cure a disease, he would voluntarily infect himself with that same disease, each time doing so by getting afflicted with every disease he had ever recorded. He had accumulated over 100 diseases, which meant that he had suffered these afflictions over 100 times. But no matter what, Nala needed to defeat this opponent, as she was indeed walking on the right path. There was the need for her to be confused. Enduring the afflictions of these illnesses, Nala's dragon's pressure madly surged forward into her surroundings as Nala continued her unique rhythmic breathing. The two effects combined and inflicted a heavy sense of fear into the hearts of everyone around her. At this moment, everything in this world was under Nala's control. She seemed to have become God's incarnation herself, ruling over the life and death of everyone around her. Without hesitation, Nala swung her sword. Despite not hitting anyone with the attack, a clean slash mark appeared on Meyerson's body before it was collapsed in two pieces. The masked Ellis was the same, their body cut up horizontally, the cleaved surface giving off a foul scent of burnt flesh. Even Connor's iron ball that came flying was the same, cut in half in an instant. The smooth surface of the cut on the iron ball showed traces of it being burnt, displaying just how sharp that slash was just now. Her dragon's pressure gradually faded. Nala panted heavily while pointing her sword at Connor, the only ghostman fortunate enough to survive that attack. Meyerson collapsed on one side. His immortal, undead body did not do anything to save him. He could feel his life slowly slipping away from him, the same feeling from over 20 years ago when he was waiting for death from the disease in the slums. Augustine's figure appeared before his eyes. It was him who had come to the slums and rescued Meyerson, who was waiting to die all those years ago. Good men like him have probably made it to heaven, while people like me should be struck down to hell. It's a pity that I couldn't say sorry to him, but I do not regret my decision from that time. Following Meyerson's death, his ability also faded away. The symptoms of illness gradually subsided on Nala's body. Her eyes were just as sharp and unwavering as they were in the beginning. As soon as she defeated these people, she would be able to enter the gate and head into the kiln of the first flame. Dragon's pressure, combined with respiratory art, taking control of all rhythm within the range of Dragon's pressure for a brief moment, completely dominating them, then cutting them all off. Noah smiled as he commented. He could clearly see the principles behind Nala's slash just now. In a way, as long as something belonged in this world, she would be able to kill it. At this point, it was necessary to understand the origin of respiratory art. The so-called essence of respiratory art was nothing but the perception and harmonization of oneself with the rhythm of this world, and was the current world not one born from the flame? Therefore, the nature of all rhythm in this world was actually the flickering frequency of the first flame. Our Nigerian Irio, as one of the three gods who came out from the first flame, the dragon race that the progenitor dragon created was naturally born with this world's authority. Through dragon's pressure, dragons were able to force the world, which was also the flame, around them to harmonize with themselves, harnessing it to produce their signature dragon's breath. Because of that, Nala, who combined dragon's pressure and respiratory art, was able to fully control the rhythm of the world for a very brief moment and destroy anything created from the flame in this world. And if a being's rhythm was destroyed, even an immortal body would die. Respiratory art was most likely a technique invented by the giant in order to prolong the flame. By restricting it so that only humans can utilize it, he also prevented this power from being acquired by the Black Abyss. Through this phenomenon, Noah discovered the essence of respiratory art. He then recalled the information that he had obtained through studying the records of the Koshi people's spirit shamans over these years. Although the Koshi people claimed to be a race of humans created from the spirit of the progenitor of all things, through his constant research, he had found the truth. Rather than being offsprings of the giant, the Koshi people were more likely to be a hybrid between humans and the divine race. The names of gods uttered by the spirit shamans, through the memory of the last god, Negary had found that most of them were actually names of members from the original divine race from the ancient era, including the name Negary. However, during the First Empire, the new deity had already brought the divine race with him and fled this world. In order to conceal this disgraceful fact, after the Koshi established their empire, they destroyed the majority of the records regarding the divine race and modified the creation mythos. The giant was uplifted as the progenitor of all things and claimed themselves to have originated from its spirit. As he thought about this, Noah looked at the girl who was still as pure as she ever was and grinned. Nala inherited the dragon bloodline from her mother, became proficient in respiratory art that was created and handed down by the giant, and her father Jacob was a Koshi person whose power reflected more prominently in their spirit. It just so happened that Nala inherited a bit of everything from the three original gods who came from the first flame. It was no wonder Nala became the saintress of salvation. It could even be said that probably no one was more suitable than she was to prolong the flame. Granny Sealy was watching Nala with the same eerie chuckle she always had. It was because she had foreseen this that she declared that prophecy about the saintress of salvation and pushed Nala to her current position. Connor looked down at the big iron ball that had been cut in half and said nothing, then walked towards Nala. After using that attack that could kill anything, she was exhausted, unable to use it second time. So what was there to fear? Nala wielded her dragon scale sword, panting heavily, and charged towards Connor. At the same time, the other battles were also gradually coming to an end. Jason's white mask had already been destroyed, revealing his rotten face. After he was transformed into an undead, his body had rotted halfway through before he arrived at Sacred Valley and was modified into a blood burner, thus obtaining a great amount of life force. Despite that, his rotten body already couldn't be healed anymore. His battle with Cadiz was extremely brutal. As an undead and a blood burner, Jason basically had an immortal body. But the same was true for Cadiz, an undead body combined with germs that also resulted in an immortal body. Because of this, both of them had no need to dodge. Both used a fighting style that ensured mutual destruction. Jason's flames of vitality and Cadiz's flames of malice, streaks of burning red and blue, were weaving against one another. Ever since Cadiz killed Jason's family 17 years ago, the fate of these two similar yet different people had been entangled with one another. One of them pursued nothing but revenge, while the other pursued the pure catharsis of unleashing his malice. These two had begun and continued this irreconcilable battle in this way. Jason's body was turning into charcoal, not having much life force left in his body. His opponent Cadiz was also the same. The excessive consumption of the germs that made up his body to heal had turned him into a dried-up husk. These two crippled-looking men continued to stick as close as possible, attacking the other with all they had. Ha ha ha, Jason Todd, this has been my most enjoyable battle so far. Cadiz's voice was extremely dry, but his tone was full of pleasure. Maybe we will die together in the end. Say, do you think the people in the future, when they find our corpses lying in the same place, would they think that we were a couple? You scum. Do you want to pass on your malice to others even after you die? Jason furiously ignited the last bit of his life force, burning Cadiz's body with all he had and thoroughly killed him, then finally collapsed, also losing his life. Tisk, TSK, TSK, so that is how Jason dies. I wonder if he's going to be resurrected from a certain lake, a certain spring, or a certain pit. Although he's most likely just going to die for good, Jack the Killer flexibly evaded the attacks of several knights while muttering words that other people couldn't understand. Say, Mr. Marshall, can't we just make peace here? Killing and fighting isn't a good thing to do, you know. Jack continued his trash talk, making Reese particularly irritated while attacking him. Especially whenever he called him Mr. Marshall. It felt as if he was calling him a pedophile scum, causing Reese even more irritation. Although he had done shady things, he wouldn't be scum. In short, Jack the Killer's endless blabbering made the knights around him furious to no end. Right now, each of them wanted nothing more than to chop him to pieces, cut off his tongue, and sew his mouth shut. Unfortunately, not only was Jack's ability to dodge and evade top class, but he also had an immortal body that allowed him to heal any wounds in the blink of an eye. Wait, Boss Man is here. Sadly for you, there's no Jotaro in this world. Type Moon and JoJo aren't in the same universe anyway, so just surrender. Jack spouted a lot of nonsense again, although his words did carry a certain message. At the entrance, the sound of steady footsteps resounded. Negary's silhouette appeared in front of everyone. The battle between the Crowmen and the Sacred Valley Assassins stopped, while Jack instantly moved to stand behind Negary. Only the battle between Nala and Connor continued. Due to unleashing that strike earlier, the nearly drained Nala was gradually losing to Connor. When the knights tried to go to help her, Jack and the Crowmen swiftly stopped them. Just stand and watch. If she cannot triumph over this small obstacle, she won't even be qualified to prolong the flame. Negary crossed his arms, watched Nala's hard fight, and lightly declared, "No." Standing not too far away, Noah began to whisper all kinds of god names. Borrowing the power of those names, all things in the world seemed to have gathered in Noah's hand. The waves of power he gave off drew Nala's attention, telling her that the power in Noah's hand was the key for her to win against her opponent. The constant battles were making Nala's body grow more and more fatigued, yet at the same time uplifting her spirit to a certain extreme. The god names that Noah uttered gradually turned into a unique rhythm, as each of the names was a kind of spiritual rhythm. The power of the Koshi, or rather of the divine race, that lurked inside Nala's body gradually began to awaken. The authority of the divine race started to bless Nala's body little by little. If the dragon race's authority allowed them to force the rhythm of all things to harmonize with themselves and harness the power of fire breath, then the divine race's authority allowed them to rule over the changes of the flame. A simple flame could only destroy, unable to manifest as everything that existed in this world. But once Nala awakened the power of the divine race within herself, her rhythm began to fully synchronize and became the exact same as the rhythm of all things. All things in the world began to transform into sustenance that directly supplemented Nala's drained physique surrounding her, calling her to evolve to a higher level. With the authority of the three gods and the flames, Nala was practically the god of this world. Of course, being subjected to the limits of the world, she might not even be as powerful as those gods from the divine race of the ancient era. With the dragon scale sword pointed straight at him, Connor felt that he could be killed in one fell swoop if he made another move. In fact, he felt that Nala could use the authority of the divine race to directly transform him into someone else entirely, mimicking the power of witchcraft. Or perhaps more accurately, witchcraft was originally imitating this authority in the first place. Step down, Connor Negary's voice resounded, allowing Connor to relax and quickly step away. Granny Sealy also chuckled oddly as she stood away from the large gate of bones behind her. The first flame was inside. Nala could sense it. Turning around to take a look at Negary, Nala really wanted to take his life right at this moment. After all, Negary was the enemy who killed her father and an extremely evil monster at the same time. But to her surprise, she was able to clearly perceive the state of Negary's soul, which was only a bit lesser than her own. Her instincts were telling her that it might be possible for her to kill Negary, but it would take a very long time, and that the first flame might go out at any second now. So Nala turned and walked towards the Gate of Bones, which gradually opened under her divine authority. Inferring from the position of the Handbones Valley, then the place where the white Gate of Bone was located was probably the giant's head. This was a huge, irregular spherical space. The ground was filled with mud, while a small mass of flickering flames stood in the center of the sphere, illuminating the surroundings. The small mass of flame appeared to be incredibly weak, but was giving off an extraordinary sense of warmth to everyone present. Looking at the flame, one would feel like it contained everything in this world. This was the first flame that which created all things in this world. Despite looking like an ordinary flame, it was in fact the manifestation of this world's authority, from which the authorities of the three gods originated from. And now, Nala, who had the power of the three gods, would need to turn herself into a torch and fuel this flame, once again purifying the world of the Black Abyss. The channel through which the new deity and the progenitor dragon left this world was also inside the first flame. Once Nala committed herself as fuel and made the flame grow strong enough again, Negary would be able to rely on his dragon body to leave through the channel that the other dragons left from. Nala didn't hesitate. Her eyes were still as clear as they ever were when she headed into the first flame. The assassins of Sacred Valley reflexively wanted to stop her, but realized that it didn't matter if they stopped her or not. They could only hope now that the Nala truly wished to prolong the flame. Lord Negary, Granny Sealy, who was standing by the side, suddenly spoke up. This was the scene that I had foreseen. A young girl who had the power of the three gods stepped towards the first flame with resolution, then became the decapitated. Nala's steps towards the first flame abruptly stopped. Some sort of power had descended and suppressed everyone present. This power wasn't of this world, or rather, wasn't born from the flame, but from the Black Abyss. This power controlled Nala, made her involuntarily wield her dragon scale sword, put against her neck, and slowly pushed the sharp blade through her skin. Nala continually used the power of the three gods to resist this power, but to little effect as the sword gradually went deeper. Negary tried moving his body, but found that the power made it impossible for him to move. As he tried moving his mouth, he noticed it didn't restrict his ability to speak, so he grinned. Unspeakable side of God, the cut tongue? Who would have thought that one of the leaders of Hales had been lurking by my side all this time? I always thought that the four sides of God must be evil spirits. The requirement isn't to be an evil spirit, but rather having an origin from the Black Abyss that had achieved release. Granny Sealy, he chuckled in her strange voice. As the essence of origin is a connection with the universe itself, there are a few people on this continent whose origin came from the Black Abyss. That is the so-called Black Abyss trait that these assassins of Sacred Valley are after. My talents are not any worse than the first witch, but this world limits my potential. The way to release origin is to grow closer to the root of one's origin. My origin came from the Black Abyss, and this world that prevents the Black Abyss from returning is blocking my path. So that's how it is. Negary swiftly understood. The world's flame isn't quite as fragile as we assumed it to be. Since there are qualifications for the one prolonging the flame, there are naturally qualifications for the one dousing it as well, correct? That is correct. The three gods of the first flame corresponded to 3 out of the 4 sides of God. The dragon corresponds to the unseeable side because they represented disaster and calamity. The divine race corresponds to the unspeakable side, representing their mystical aspects. The giant created the humans, which corresponds to the unfathomable side, representing humanity's ability and potential to create miracles. Only when the 3 gods are gathered can they become the representative of the flame, which corresponds to the existence outside of this world, and that which cannot be understood with reason, the Black Abyss. By sacrificing Nala, who holds the authority of the 3 gods, to the Black Abyss, the flame shall be completely reversed, the light shall be dispelled, and this world shall truly return to its original appearance in the Black Abyss. There should be a certain purpose as to why you've specifically explained all of this to me, Otherwise, I don't think you would say so much, Negary asked with intrigue. This is exactly why I revere Lord Negary, Granny Seal said sincerely. Regardless of the adversity you face, you can always remain calm and seize every opportunity to become stronger until you overcome all adversity be. It was because I dare not look down upon Lord Negary that I had surrendered the originally chosen chopped hand, Ellis, to Lord Negary, despite paying such a huge price to create her, as well as sincerely teaching Milord about supernatural knowledge to gain Milord's trust. If it weren't for Lord Negary's existence, this old woman's plan would not have gone so smoothly. Eldridge alone would have caused this old woman plenty of headache, Granny Sealy exaggerated. It was because Lord Negary brought Nala into existence that I managed to come up with this plan. The reason why this old woman explained so much to Lord Negary is partly that I truly admire Lord Negary, but also partly because of the Black Abyss. This world was originally just a corner of the Black Abyss, but it was also a great existence beyond our imagination. After being broken by the white light and burnt by the flame, its original Black Abyss attribute had already been altered, greatly weakened from its original self. After being burnt by the last god, the Black Abyss attribute had been weakened yet again. So if it was allowed to be burnt once more, it would be hard to say if the Black Abyss attribute would still exist at all. Even if the flame was extinguished and allowed this corner to return to its original Black Abyss appearance, the Black Abyss attribute itself would not be too strong. And so this old woman needed another betting chip, something to allow this corner of the Black Abyss to become stronger, or perhaps even regain its original greatness. So I'm the other sacrifice. You want to use me to attract the attention of the root Black Abyss and help this corner of the Black Abyss return to its original eminence. Negary quickly understood with just a bit of thought, because I represent another world. Indeed, although your origin has been lost, as well as your crown symbolizing the sun of the world, all of this is no issue to the great Black Abyss. You will become the point of breakthrough for Black Abyss to invade another world. And so, won't Lord Negary cooperate with me properly? Kiki, Granny Sealy said with her strange laugh. The root Black Abyss will replenish Lord Negary's origin and crown, at which point Lord Negary's position in the Black Abyss might even be greater than my own. What a terrible result. Negary raised his eyebrows. Nala's sword had already cut a certain depth into her neck. Even if Nala was now in charge of the authority of the three gods and her body had grown considerably stronger than before, if this was left to continue, she would still lose her life. Lord Negary, you cannot resist against my unspeakable destiny, because I have foreseen destiny itself. The power of destiny shall continue to push you towards the ending that I had foreseen. Destiny? Negary didn't feel enraged at all from the betrayal and calmly analyzed. This power shouldn't be quite this strong in the beginning. It is because you have been planning and arranging every little detail over the years, slowly guiding everything down this path that it had accumulated and grew to this degree. Isn't it? This was similar to how a marble that you dropped from your hand could roll in any number of directions, depending on what happens on the ground. Granny Celia's destiny ability was to determine the only direction that the marble would roll in, then build the channel to guide the marble down that direction. The force of the marble was the greatest at first, so it might roll off from the channel, but the more it followed the channel's guidance, the less force it contained until finally it could no longer jump in any other directions. And the force exerted on Negary and the others right now was that channel itself. Granny Sealy had planned for so many years that the force contained in the marble had been reduced to rock bottom. You realized too late, Lord Negary. Despite saying so, Granny Seal, who was still observing Negary vigilantly. As she had said, she had always admired and revered Negary, the more reason so that she couldn't underestimate Negary. Granny Sealy revered Negary. That was undeniable. But her reverence and her pursuit of ideals did not conflict against one another. It was because she understood Negary's power that she paid close attention to him, even dispatching the dazzled and the chopped hand to attack him and successfully deprive one of Negary's trump cards, the Church of the Divine Grace's original evil spirit. If not for that, With the power of the original evil spirit, it might have been possible for him to break out of the restraints of her destiny power. Destiny was the ability that Granny Sealy obtained through releasing the first stage of her origin. Its strength in direct combat was negligible and required extensive layers of preparations in order to exert its greatest effect. And her preparations up to this point had made it so that not even Nala, who had obtained the authority of the three gods, could resist this power. However, even now Granny Sealy was wary that Negary might have a trump card to escape her destiny. No, he surely had a trump card to escape her destiny. That was why she had used her explanations as an excuse to buy time and delay his actions. The closer the Black Abyss approached, the stronger her power grew, so the more time she could buy before Negary used his trump card, the more advantageous it was for her. The Church of Divine Grace called evil spirits the error of this world. This is actually true. Negary's body, despite being under the restraints of destiny, was still slowly growing scales bit by bit. He slowly spoke. The first flame created a perfect digestive system that consumed the power of the Black Abyss through the cycle of life. But regretfully, the new deity and the progenitor dragon escaped, thus leaving a loophole in this system. The last god later tried to repair this, but left errors remaining, which were the evil spirits. Normally, after the death of a life, their true spirit would go into reincarnation, while the remnant soul would be burned away by the flames. But due to the error, remnant souls could sustain themselves through the death of others. Their very existence ruined the order of this world. Because of that, the more evil spirits there were, the closer the Black Abyss would be. And the closer the Black Abyss was, the more evil spirits would be created. The new deity was replaced by the last god, which somewhat allowed the loophole to be repaired, but the progenitor dragon never had a substitute. As the progenitor dragon represented the flame, it was the lack of his substitution that a remnant soul was able to struggle at death's door within this world's flame. Otherwise, any remnant soul would simply be burned away and return to the world as soon as they appeared. The dragon is the root of the error in this world. This is also the reason why I pursued the power of the dragon. The scales on Negary's body began to fall off one by one, and tiny tentacles spread as his body quickly became deformed. Using the correct form of the dragon, my power would never be able to surpass the limit of this world. Because of that, this is the form of the dragon of error, or rather, the dragon of eternal sin. Negary's form began to drastically change. Firstly, 3 tumors grew and burst on his back. As the mucus dripped to the floor, 3 individual fleshy wings stretched outwards. A tail started growing from the end of his tailbone, then split into several tentacles at the tip. The most terrifying change was on Negary's chest. Sharp fangs started to manifest right in the middle of his torso. A total of 3 circles of teeth opened up one after another, clearly revealing a large bulge right inside his body. With a single glance, anyone could tell that this creature should not have existed in this world. It felt as if the creature was the synonym for error, and that its existence was an unforgivable sin. The sin of the progenitor dragon betraying this world seemed to have been imprinted on and all over its body. This was one of Negary's trump cards, the transformation into this world's error itself, the symbol for the progenitor dragon's betrayal, the dragon of eternal sin. The power of destiny that Granny Sealy had placed on Negary was disturbed by this error, allowing Negary to break off the restraints of fate. The dragonmen, whose existence was largely ignored up to now, affected by Negary's transformation, also began to deform and morph into a wrongful appearance. The one who changed the most was Yadley, the former captain of the Crowmen, whose body mutated into a false draconic form that roughly resembled Negary. The idea of the dragon of eternal sin originally came from Yadley. When his heart was literally broken by Chris, he had taken and replaced his heart with the bizarre Scales heart, contaminating the dragon's blood and gradually mutating. Negary took a fancy to this power and began to study it. Only after studying mysticism, Dracatung, and various other secrets with Granny Sealy did Negary manage to complete the real idea of the dragon of eternal sin. By combining the error of the evil spirits and the sin of the dragons, he completed his current form and gained power beyond the limits of the world. Inoue, perhaps I should say, as expected of Lord Negary. Granny Sealy stared at Negary, who had taken the dragon of eternal sin form, and spoke full of reverence. Lord Negary is such an existence. Even as an enemy, I can't help but be deeply impressed by his strength. This strength wasn't simply referring to his power or anything else, but rather his own prowess. Clearly, he was only an evil spirit who had lost its origin, one whose potential was destined to be limited, and yet he was able to grasp every opportunity he could, untiringly change himself, and gain strength beyond his own limit. She did not possess this kind of strength. The more she understood about her own abilities, the more she revered Negary. As such, Granny Sealy had always referred to Negary as Lord with sincerity from the bottom of her heart. "Come, Lord Negary, let this old woman see how powerful you are." Granny Sealy opened her eyes wide. A great amount of indescribable power surged forth from her body as she madly screamed, "Cover it all! Destiny! Put everything under your control." As the power of destiny that bound everyone loosened, it began to pour into the world. Something seemed to have changed about the world. A feeling mixed of falsehood and truth was everywhere around them. Negary let out a thunderous roar. In front of a pile of extinguished flames, a headless girl wielded the dragon-scale sword, turned to face them, then slowly walked towards Negary. Representing the unreasonable side of God, the decapitated former saintress of salvation, Nala Dakmi, had now turned into the representative of the Black Abyss, coming to deliver the sword of death upon everyone here. The minds of the assassins of Sacred Valley collapsed as they saw the extinguished flames. They knew that they shouldn't have let anyone approach the first flame, but so what if they knew? They were powerless to prevent anything in the first place. "Wait, it's not over yet," Noah spoke up on the side. "Most likely, this place is being covered by Sealy's future prediction. As long as we defeat this future, we will defeat Sealy and set things back on track. Be courageous and face our saintress of salvation. Even if you are useless, you can at least try to act a bit less shameful, can't you?" Noah said. The dragon of eternal sin and headless girl, Negary and Nala. One of them exuded a dragon's pressure, full of fallacy, while the other gave off the presence of the Black Abyss. Negary had been able to grow to the point he had today, to a large extent, through relying on the dragon's blood inside Nala, while Nala was only able to grow to her current self through Negary's continuous training. The fate of the two entangled with one another, so it was only fitting for there to be a battle to end it all. This great one didn't expect to have to save the world one day. Weren't we supposed to be the villains here? Jack the Killer said with an ecstatic expression on his face. After this, I'm definitely changing my business card to Savior J. With a huge roar, Negary swiped across with his dragon claws. The headless Nala vigorously drew away from Negary's attack and retaliated with a swing of her sword. A huge wound was inflicted on the body of the dragon of eternal sin, but the deformed body, filled with error, simply grew back and quickly healed itself. According to Sealy's foresight, Nala, who had gathered the authority of the three gods, would be equivalent to the dazzled, the chopped hand, as well as the cut tongue of Hales. The dazzled and chopped hand were killed by Negary, but their qualities were recovered by the Black Abyss. So when they combined with Sealy's power as the cut tongue, the unspeakable power of destiny allowed for the creation of the unreasonable, the decapitated Nala in this future. Nala, who originally gathered the authority of the three gods, had the ability to control everything within the flame world. But in this future, Nala, who had become the decapitated, controlled the unreasonable power of the Black Abyss. Although she lost the ability to control everything in the flame world, her attacks had become more bizarre and tougher to resist. Ah shit, our Jean Dark first turned into a senior sister, then became blackened and is back to kill us. Jack the Killer continued to spout his nonsense as he drew a small dagger and charged at Nala. He was then hit by something unknown, tumbled backwards on the spot, and fell to the ground. He then silently rubbed blood all over his face, stuck out his tongue, and played dead. Negary was the one who endured most of Nala's attacks. Although his dragon of eternal sin body had powerful regenerative capabilities, it gradually became unable to regenerate anymore. With each of her bizarre attacks, Nala left a bit of the Black Abyss power within his wounds. The unique trait of that power was completely beyond Negary's understanding. Regardless of what he tried, he was still unable to expel it from himself. If this was left to go on, more and more Black Abyss power would accumulate inside his body until he was thoroughly infected by the Black Abyss and became a part of it. Negary roared again, this time unleashing a gust of scorching flames from his mouth. But an incomprehensible power surged forward from Nala's body, canceling out the flames while Nala's sword struck Negary's body again through the flames, leaving another bit of Black Abyss power in his body. Gradually, Negary felt that the power of the Black Abyss was no longer as difficult to understand as before, but this was also the most terrifying thing. This meant that the Black Abyss was constantly assimilating him and distorting his perception. Once he fully comprehended the Black Abyss, it would mean that Negary had been completely assimilated by it and became a part of it. Other than Noah, who was using his spirit shaman abilities that could carry out a certain amount of harassment from a distance, the others couldn't even endure 2 hits from Nala. Seems like I'll have to use another trump card. Negary moved his dragon body and swung his huge tail forward. The burning tail of tentacles managed to push Nala back briefly. The dragon then stood upright. The 3 layers of fangs on its back opened wide, spitting the blob of flesh in the center out. The flesh slowly peeled off layer by layer to reveal the thing hidden inside. It was a severed head. Even as the owner of the head was wrapped inside the blob of flesh, he still exuded a sense of extraordinary majesty that incited the impulse to pledge one's allegiance to him. As the eyes of the head opened, his incomprehensible gaze displayed his dignity as a king, despite his current embarrassing predicament. Negary, you are really shameless. With a brief glance at his surroundings and the information that Negary was sending to him via their mental connection, Eldridge quickly understood what was going on. In the ruins of the last god, Negary decapitated Eldridge, but he did not kill him. Instead, he ripped open his own chest and put his head inside, using virus manipulation to change the inner structures of his body and provided life support for Eldridge up until this moment. While he was still alive, regardless of how great Eldridge was, he is still only a human. Even if his subjects supported him with all their hearts, the majority of them would not consider him to be their lifelong belief. But this was different in his death. The living simply could not compete against the dead in a few aspects. And since Eldridge had already lost his life, the aristocrats of Royas did not mind deifying him, especially at the advent of the Black Abyss. Nigeria, Nairobi. The influence of the Black Abyss had caused people with the Black Abyss trait to mutate and turn into mud monsters. The world itself had turned foreign, so it was natural for the people to cling to some sort of belief at such a time in order to inspire their own confidence. The newly deceased King Eldridge was a perfect target for such belief, and especially so since Negary had secretly dispatched personnel to slightly modify and spread the tale of the last god. If one went to the current Roya's kingdom, they would find that Eldridge's reputation had reached a status similar to that of a god. Everyone was reciting Eldridge's name, hailing him as the guardian god of Royas, while singing praise of his marvelous feats. After Eldridge understood the situation, he used the power of the last god and tried his best to establish contact with his believers. Even though he was beheaded by Negary, he currently had no choice but to help Negary. As he said, he was the king and held the responsibility of the king. If the flame was extinguished, the Roya's kingdom would also not escape destruction. After Eldridge appeared, the headless girl began to focus her attacks on Eldridge's head. After all, this was only a false future created through Granny Celia's destiny cover. Since the people here were deeply caught within this destiny, it was tough for them to break through it, making the decapitated within this destiny essentially unbeatable. But once Eldridge used the power of the last god to establish a connection with a large number of Roya's citizens who regarded him as a god, their individually weak destinies would combine to form a large variable, thus forcing destiny to deviate from Granny Celia's control. The more this destiny deviated, the more fragile this false future would become, and the weaker the decapitated would be. If possible, Negary would naturally want to keep Eldridge inside his chest to protect this key that would break through the situation. But the very strength of the dragon of eternal sin form made this impossible. The error attribute of the dragon of eternal sin would interfere with Eldridge's power if he were to do that. Then, let's fight with all our strength. Negary flapped the fleshy dragon wings behind his back to kick up an intense gust of wind. The tentacles at the end of his tail madly extended and stabbed into the bodies of the useless spectators in this place. The dragon men, ghost men, crow men, the assassins of Sacred Valley, Nala's night followers, Negary's righteous, Noah. Even Jack the Killer, who was playing dead, was pierced through by Negary's tail-end tentacles and became his nutrients. Well then, it seems I'll need to leave the field for a while. Jack the Killer blew raspberries before his body melted and was fully absorbed by Negary. Negary, who had now grown several times larger, roared and soared towards the headless girl. Several hundred strains of different germs and viruses derived from the progenitor germs also spread all over the battlefield. The bizarre power of the Black Abyss overflowed from the headless girl's body. Facing Negary's attack, she didn't choose to retreat and instead charged forward with her sword in hand.